Okay, so thank you very much to our witnesses from Statistics Canada. We have Alison Hale, who's the Director of the Labour Statistics Division, and Marie Drolet, Research Economist with the Labour Statistics Division. And I believe that members have a hard copy of the PowerPoint presentation entitled An Overview of the Gender Pay Gap. If you don't, it's being distributed right now. So, bienvenue, thank you very much, and we will start with 10-minute presentation. Will you both be speaking, or?
I'll be speaking.
Okay, so I call on Ms. Hale. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon. So first off, I just want to remind everybody that today is Census Day, so we're all very happy. It's StatsCan today, so just want to remind everybody to check your mailboxes. Thank you. And I also want to thank you for the opportunity to present to the Special Committee on Pay Equity. Our presentation today contains data and analysis from Statistics Canada related to the gender pay gap that may inform your discussions. The fact that men continue to earn more than women is not new. The first objective of today's presentation is not to provide a single definitive estimate of the pay gap, but rather the goal is to describe the different measures that are commonly used to describe gender pay differences and to demonstrate that measurement and methodology matters. The second goal is to demonstrate how the Canadian gender pay gap has changed over time. So I'm going to the second slide. The most widely cited statistics on the gender pay gap is based on annual earnings. Women working full year, full-time, earn 74 cents for every dollar earned by men. An alternative measure is based on hourly wages. Women earn on average about 86 cents for every dollar earned by men. Why the large difference in these ratios? One caveat with the earnings ratio is that it does not accurately account for differences in work volume. In 2015, full-time men worked about 3.3 hours longer than women who worked full-time. So in principle, there could be no gender gaps in hourly wages, but one in annual earnings simply because men work more hours than women. Another caveat of the earnings ratio is that it excludes a large and changing segment of the population. In 2013, roughly 68% of women and 75% worked full year, full time. So ratios based on hourly wages overcome these problems, have the added advantage of being job specific, thereby facilitating comparisons between the wages of men and women. Going to the third slide. Here, looking just at the trend since the 80s in these two gender-based ratios. One using annual earnings, which is the one on the bottom, the solid line, of full-time, full-year workers, and the other an hourly wage rate of full-time workers. Between 1984 and 1992, the annual earnings ratio increased by 7.5 percentage points. After 1992, the series for the annual earnings remained relatively stagnant. This difference from the hourly wage ratio, which increased moderately throughout the period. Going to slide 4. So when you're trying to describe the gender wage gap, researchers also look at the attributes men and women bring into the workplace. In 2012, men had roughly 3 years more work experience than women. This difference accounts for work interruptions, for any restriction in the number of hours worked per week, or in the number of weeks worked per year. Difference in experience, coupled with the fact that wages increase with work experience, accounts for about 11% of the gender pay gap. It is a well-known fact that educational attainment of both men and women has been rising, but there have been persistent differences between the fields of study chosen by men and women. Since wages differ by field of study, the choice of discipline accounts for about 4% of the overall gender pay gap. Men and women also differ in the types of workplace to which they belong. The characteristics of the workplace accounts for more of gender pay gap than differences in work characteristics such as education and experience. And that women are concentrated in low-wage workplaces. The results showed that Women earn about 15% less than men when the workplace is not taken into account, compared to 8% less when workplace controls were included. When the wage ratio is adjusted for differences in the observable characteristics of men and women and the workplaces to which they belong, women earn on average over 90 cents for every dollar earned by men. Going to slide 5. Despite the long list of factors used in the various studies, a portion of the gender wage pay gap cannot be explained. Excuse me. There are numerous other factors that are not accounted for that may contribute to our understanding of the gender pay differences. Take, for example, pre-labor market experiences, personal choices, expectations of family and friends, or the education system may influence the level of educational attainment, the choice of field of study, whether to participate in the labor force, job selection, work habits, and career progression. Differences in any of these factors can manifest itself in different labor market behaviors and ultimately in different labor market outcomes, namely wages. Going to the next slide. So again, trying to explain why the gender wage gap narrowed between 1988 and 2008. Between 1988 and 2008, women's real wages increased by 12%, with increases occurring in all age groups and at all points across the wage distribution. But the dramatic change occurred among older workers and those at the higher end of the wage distribution. In contrast, the real wages of men increased by 1.3%. Losses were incurred among men in some age groups and at the lower end of the wage distribution. While women make up half of the paid workforce in Canada, it is their changing relative position that matters for wages. 3 trends were noted. Education. The proportion of women in the labor force with a university degree has nearly doubled from the early 1990s and now surpasses that of men. Most university degrees are now granted to women. Wage gap among university education remained at 16% due to persistent gender differences in major field of study. Women outnumber men in social sciences and health, while men outnumber women in mathematics and engineering. Looking at job tenure, there have been an increase in the average job tenure among women so that there is no longer a difference when compared to men. Also, women used to be much more likely to be in a job that had just started, a tenure of less than 3 months, in the 90s, while that is no longer the case. Finally, structural changes in the Canadian economy help explain why the wage ratio narrowed between 1988 and 2008. The shift away from manufacturing jobs and a decline in unionization had a disproportionately larger impact on men's wages. Women increased the representation in high-wage occupations such as senior management positions throughout the period. However, the wage gap in these occupations continued to be larger than the average. This is not surprising, since increasing representation is first apparent at the lower or entry-level positions within these high-wage occupations. Other Canadian research has shown that women continue to choose a more narrow range of occupations than men, and that women still represent a large portion of workers employed in the 20 poorest paid occupations. Female-dominated occupations like health and education had relatively small initial pay gaps at the beginning of this period and changed very little over time. These changes in marketable characteristics accounted for about 60% of the narrowing of the wage gap between 1988 and 2008. Going to the next slide, 7. Now I'll turn to examining the changing relationship between gender wage gap and age. In any given year, wage gaps are larger among older workers than younger workers. For example, in 2008, the wage gap was 19.3% among those aged 50 to 54 versus 9.9% among those aged 25 to 29. Also, year-to-year differences, wage gaps in all age groups are becoming smaller. Among persons aged 35 to 39, the wage gap was 23.2% in 1988, whereas it has shrunk to 16.3% in 2008. Following a birth cohort over time, there is little evidence of a widening of the wage gap as workers age. For example, in 1988, the wage gap was 20.6% among those aged 30 to 34. By 2008, when this group was now aged 50 to 54, the wage gap for this cohort was 19.3%, not much of a change. Generally, the wage gap early in their career is a good indicator of the gap throughout a generation's working life.
If I may ask you to finish up quickly.
Yeah, I'm just on the
10
summary
minutes.
page,
Okay.
so it works out well, for once. So the goal of this presentation was to highlight that gender wage inequality is complex and that it requires analysis from a number of different perspectives. The narrowing of the wage gap since the late 80s is due to compositional changes, changing in how the labor market compensates workers, and to the fact that wages of men and women no longer diverge as they age. There are two things to keep in mind when looking at the gender pay gap. First, measurement matters in terms of both level and trend. In the current context, hourly wage ratios are higher than annual earnings ratios, with the earnings ratio showing little change over time, while the wage ratios continue to increase. Secondly, methodology also matters. The raw or unadjusted pay gaps do not simultaneously control for a variety of other factors besides gender that can influence wages. As shown, the gender pay gap narrows considerably to over 90 cents after controlling for these effects. I hope you found this interesting. Also included in the package were some supplementary slides that will provide more information.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for that excellent information. And we'll now go into rounds of questioning. We'll start with Ms. Zarovitz, who has 10 minutes. Or, sorry, 7 minutes.
Yes, 7 minutes is more than enough. Thank you. First, I want to begin by saying happy Census Day. And I want to also say thank you so much for the excellent presentation. Whew, so much to wrap my mind around in a short period of time. One of the things I'm grappling with as we're kind of going through trying to think about sort of proactive pay equity legislation is this is at the federal level. So there's a whole number. The thing I'm trying to wrap myself around is we have a number of women that are not paid equal to men at the federal level, but they don't have an equal comparator in terms of like an automatic male sort of group. So it's not like we've got men and women in a group and then, oh, these men are paid more, and so we want women to sort of be paid the same. What advice or what information do you think we should be looking at if we're trying to look at, say there's like 50 or 60 categories of women that we're trying to see how is it that we can create equal pay? What's the statistics or what's the information that you would advise us to look at when we're trying to create legislation that will help us to create legislation that will create a bit of an equalizing sort of force? So that's my first question. And then maybe I'm just going to give the second. We have two provinces that have actually put in pay equity legislation. I don't know if there's anything that you can draw from them in terms of what they have done that you think has been particularly helpful, or if you think, oh, maybe here's some additional information you might want to look at. So I don't know if there's anything that you can comment on in terms of what they have looked at. So those are my first two questions.
Well, just to answer the second, I'm not aware of any studies that have looked at the two provinces who put in pay equity to see if there's differences.
How to equalize wages across occupations. A number of these studies that we have controls for experience, job tenure. So I'm not sure if the occupations that you are addressing have that information associated with them, because we do know that wages increase with experience. Wages do increase with occupation. And we find that in a lot of our studies that if you control for the workplace, the wage gap is half as large within a workplace than it is economy-wide. So getting some information based like that may help your discussion. I don't think I have anything else to add than job tenure and experience.
So then I'll go to a couple more things. One of the things that we're told, and I think I also hear when I go to the doors, is that world of work is changing. So we're getting a lot more contract work, precarious work. And so how is it in the statistics that we're seeing that this impacts the wage gap between men and women? Do you have any information around that?
Well, it's definitely true that the world of work is changing. We do have the monthly labor force survey, which does collect information, so you can look at the wages of people in those different types of jobs based on the characteristics of the job to see if there is a difference. We haven't seen anything noticeable about by gender on that area.
The gender wage gap by, let's say, part-time status is very small
Yeah.
because men and women find themselves in very different part-time jobs. There's more heterogeneity within part-time jobs for women compared to men. Men are more likely to be in the retail sales part-time jobs, whereas women can take on a variety of different part-time tasks. The labor force survey has information on self-employment, but I think it only has annual earnings associated with that and not an hourly wage rate.
Okay. Do I have any time left? Okay. So my other question is one of the many interesting things that you mentioned is while more and more women are poorest occupations, can you give us a few examples of that and why that might be the case?
In terms of university education, we still see that, I think it's in one of the supplemental slides, you still see a gender difference in major field of study, and wages vary by major field of study. So you're going to see a gender wage gap with that. Some of the Canadian research has shown that among university graduates, the gender gap is small when you first graduate, but tends to get larger 5 years later. For example, the 1995 cohort of graduates, the wage gap was, I think, about 6 or 7%, and 5 years after the fact, it was more like 13 or 14%. So you do see that it increases over time. And talking about the occupations, the 12 lowest paid occupations, we still see that women tend to choose a more narrow range of occupations than men. I think it's 2/3 of women are in education, health, office support, and sales and service occupations. And in terms of the 20 poorest paid occupations, sales support and office and clerical workers are the lowest paid.
Thank you. Great. I'm passing it over to Sonia.
Madam Chair, thank you, panel, to be being with us. Ms. Hale, you bring up a very interesting sector-by-sector analysis on the wage gap. Where would you direct us as a parliamentarian to look in terms of work already done in this regard, whether in terms of sector or regional analysis? Thank you.
Well, you'll notice in the presentation there's some references to some papers already done by Marie, who's looked at things across Canada. Marie, are you aware?
I'm not sure about the regional analysis. I haven't personally looked at that. One of my studies looked at the importance of the workplace and workplace characteristics, and that could more address what you're aiming for with the sector or industry type analysis. In that particular analysis, I looked at nonprofit firms, different workplace practices, and how that may impact the gender wage gap. So I would ask you to look at that when I don't have the reference here.
Yeah, we can send you some of the papers that Marie has written on some of that, yeah.
I think there's the 2 asterisks. And it's
Thank you.
Okay, send those to the clerk, and then we'll distribute it to the committee. And that's the end of your time. So we are now going to Ms. Gladue for 7 minutes.
Excellent, and I want to say welcome and thank you for being here. As a statistical specialist for a global business for a few years, I want you to know I love StatsCan. So I'm going to start with a question that has to do with the overall compensation as opposed to the hourly wage. Do you have any information on how much of that extra gap that occurs is due to bonuses and other forms of compensation?
The information we were providing today actually would include any overtime, but not bonuses. That's a little bit, we don't have that information, no.
Okay. I see that as an area where there's an opportunity to sort of discriminate in a sneaky way, if I could say. So I think that'll be important. In the the work that you talked about, you said that there were workplace characteristics that contribute to the devaluing sort of woman's work. Can you talk a little bit more about the workplace characteristics that are evaluated and which ones specifically you think are undervalued?
In that particular study, the statistics that Allison cited, that the wage gap is half as large within a workplace compared to across the economy wide, that used information from our workplace and employee survey, and that was circa, let's say, 1999 or so. And so in that particular one, we used workplace size and industry as control variables. There are other workplace characteristics. I'm just trying to remember what they all were. I didn't go over that particular study because it was a bit older. But there was a non-profit flag. I do think there was something to do with different compensation, like bonuses and what have you. But that was mostly when I was able to control for the workplace. Because most of these studies that are cited here, it always believes that the wages are tied to the individual worker and not necessarily to the workplace. So that was the first study, Canadian study, that brought in the workplace characteristics.
Okay. Now, we had Dr. Kathleen LaHaye here from Queen's University, who had some great statistics on the difference in gaps by Ontario and Quebec, because we were talking about the legislation there, and showed overall for Quebec that the wage gap was really 92 cents for women compared to $1 for men. And they had implemented, legislation and a few things like that. So if I look at that and I compare that to what you've said, where if you can account for all the observable characteristics, then the wage gap sort of is at 90 cents. That's consistent with what you're saying there. So do I understand that what makes up that other 10% is choices and other factors? Could you give us some examples of those?
For that, it's what economists generally refer to as the unexplained component. So economists, or researchers in the field, I should say, they take the wage gap and they partition it into an explained component and an unexplained component. The explained component looks at gender differences in productivity-related characteristics evaluated at the male pay structure. The unexplained component looks at the differences in the returns to those characteristics by men and women evaluated at the female mean characteristics. But that statistic also includes other measures of skill that aren't captured perfectly in a particular study. For example, if we're missing work experience. Okay, so if that's missing, then we know that work experience influences wages, so then it gives us a different estimate of this unexplained component. So, and the questions related to the gender pay gap are often framed in such a way that it's what would the hypothetical woman earn if she was paid according to the male pay structure. But we can use different comparative pay structures, and that will give us a different estimate of this unexplained component. So depending on the variables used in the study, depending on the methodology used, you could have differences in an unexplained component, different estimates. A lot of the studies do suggest that the unexplained component can run between 50% to 75% of the actual gender wage gap. So a lot of our models could, if we could had better data that we're missing on wages, what determines wages, we could do a better job in explaining the gender pay gap.
But there's no interview data that could be Paretoed for, women causes of why they, why they've experienced or why they have not been in the workforce as long or anything like that.
Some of our data does ask questions like that. Again, it's often debatable whether you should include measures such as that in a gender wage gap study. Analysis that fully omit, let's say, occupation and industry tend to say that choice doesn't matter or preferences don't matter, whereas analyses that include variables like that tend to undervalue any labor market constraints on wages. So oftentimes a lot of these analyses will have a model with these variables in and a model without the variables, and the reader can decide what's what in there.
Very good, thank you.
So.
To Dan.
Well, thank you. And I just want to thank the clerk specifically for bringing StatsCan in, because I think that the work that you do is very valuable not only to Canadians but to this committee. Now, you've done a very good job on kind of estimating what, and you've given us a number of different graphs here that explain there's a number of variations, how to define, how to explain. Now, I'd like to actually go back to what something Miss Derowitz had mentioned. Right now, that there is no way for StatsCan to break down provincial-specific information to quantify whether or not a province that has we've heard time and time again, a proactive regime versus a reactive regime. Is it possible to be able to section out and compare the individual wage gaps in certain provinces?
Definitely. We do have that information. I just wasn't aware of any studies. For instance, I mean, we do have our, information on the wage gap by province. I can tell you, I guess you were saying is Quebec and Ontario were the two provinces. So, for instance, Quebec, from between 1997 and 2015, the gender wage gap was 84%. In 97, it went up to 91%. Ontario went from 81% to 86%. That's just purely looking at hourly earnings. Compared to Canada, it was from 81% to 85% over that same period.
Okay, and that's the time for that question. So we'll now move on to Ms. Benson, and you have 7 minutes.
Thank you, and I appreciate the information. Just a couple of things I'd like you to comment on. Is it the role of Statistics Canada to help departments sort of be able to figure out how to evaluate a policy and be able to, be able to start to collect statistics and sort of advise departments on how best to do that? Or I guess some of the challenge here is that there needs to be some decisions on how we're going to actually be able to measure consistently over time in order to be able to evaluate whether a policy is actually impacting the gender, the gender pay gap. But from what I hear you saying, that it's difficult because there are different ways people are measuring it, and there isn't a consistent way we're saying. As a government or even as a department, of what's the best way to go forward.
Well, as you know, Statistics Canada isn't a policy department. Our role is to provide data that will help you to illuminate your discussion. So it's when people come to us and they want to understand what is happening, we will just provide that data that would help them understand what is going on in the labor market. So it really depends on the questions you have. We'll provide the data that we feel would help you understand that question you have.
So one of the things that you brought forward was that when you sort of controlled for experience and men and women at the same age and followed that cohort over a period of time, that even though they would be in similar jobs and have the same level of experience, the pay gap didn't get any better with increased experience. It's persistent, the wage gap, over time.
We do have statistics that show that the wage gap is persistent over time. We do have statistics about, I think what you're referring to more is the fact that why wages might not have diverged as much as workers aged over time. Is that correct? Well, you can look to a career path as two possible explanations. Previously, or traditionally, women have been viewed as having higher absenteeism, higher quit rates. And more recent empirical evidence suggests that there is no gender difference in absenteeism and permanent quits. So the wage gap for a particular cohort may be stagnant or decline simply because those explanations are no longer used to account for women's lower wages for a particular cohort. Another case in point would be women with children. As the children age, women are more able to devote themselves back to the labor force. So for a particular cohort or birth cohort, the wage gap could be stagnant or decline because women's increased earnings will be reflected in their work effort. So those are two reasons why the wages no longer are diverging as workers age.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah, I think I understand.
I guess another way to look at things too is that we know that the wage gap is small for young workers.
Right.
Young workers are new entrants into the labor market. They have similar skills. The impact of career interruptions have yet to take place, so the wage gap is quite small. For older workers, they had a more narrow range of occupational choices, for example. Career interruptions had taken place, but for that group, we have seen that their wages had increased quite a bit between 1988 and 2008. So that difference between the wage gap between older and younger workers is now a lot smaller. So following a birth cohort over time, we see that the wage gap at a certain point in a generation's, like at the beginning of a generation's life, kind of follows them through.
So there's sort of a point in which everyone's kind of the same, almost. And then as women's lives impact their work experience, whether that's having more unpaid work, having children, the fact that women are in more precarious, lower paid, those things start to influence and make the wage gap not get any better for women over time.
We do see that there is a family gap between women with children and women without children. Women with children earn less, even after controlling for work interruptions. Some estimates suggest that these earnings losses could be as large as $11,000 in the first year and maybe $8,000 in the second year. And the break-even point is around 7 years after a child is born. So we do have information of the impact of children on earnings. We also have information on whether or not a woman delays having children till she's a little bit older, because we know that at the beginning of your career is when lifetime earnings grow very quickly. You accumulate more work experience and training. So depending on when you take time off to have children may have an impact on your wages, and that may carry through over time.
And 1 minute. Do you have any information about the impact over generations of the wage gap on the sort of incidence of sort of poverty and the sort of what we've lost from an economic point of view? Like, really, what is the impact beyond the, not beyond as in it's less, but beyond the individual, but just economy-wide? Like, what does the gap mean in a societal term as far as productivity, as far as GDP?
No, I mean, we do know tends to be generational mobility, that as one generation, the next generation tends to be economically more mobile, especially in certain populations, but I haven't seen a study sort of looking at specifically what you're looking at.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you.
20 seconds, but okay. So now we're going to Mr. DeCourcy for 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you both for the presentation this evening. I, too, share the excitement that Census Day being today, and I promise I will get a tweet out before the end of the evening. I also appreciate the nuance and the diversity that is part of the gender wage gap and the interconnected components of that. But I want to try and focus it back into where the conversation was around the introduction of pay equity legislation in the various provinces, both in Quebec and Ontario, that have legislation covering both public and private sectors, as well as the other provincial examples. And I wonder if we go back into maybe what the statistics show us, following up on what Mr. Albus has had us starting to examine. Can we look at how that legislation has helped address the wage gap, and maybe if you can delve into some of the examples of the other provinces, such as New Brunswick or Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island?
Well, I mean, basically, we see, because basically we had a few numbers with us today of looking how the change in the gender wage ratio from 97 to 2015, basically the highest, the province with the biggest change in the gap was Nova Scotia. Second biggest is New Brunswick. I'm from Fredericton too. So,
Great little community.
and then the second one, I'm just trying to order these. Oh, the third, sorry, New Brunswick was the third and PEI was second, and then followed by, looks like Quebec and then Manitoba. So these are all information that could be calculated fairly straightforward from our database, but we could send this information to the clerk as well. It's just some summary statistics we had pulled together to have and just to show what is. But I'm not aware of anyone who's done a specific study looking at provinces that have put in a pay equity and digging further, because this is just pure raw information at a provincial level, not looking at differences by the different types of occupation, public sector versus private or any of that. But we do have that information in the labor force survey. But
Possible if you could send that by the end of the week, because we
Yep.
will be starting the report soon after
Yeah.
that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Witnesses have come before us and talked to us about the challenges around maintenance of a pay equity system once legislation or once a model is in place. I wonder, do you have any statistics or any information that would look at how maintenance mechanisms in a pay equity regime might ensure that the gender wage gap continues to narrow?
I can't even think how you'd measure that, actually. I've never seen anything like that.
As an arts graduate, I couldn't tell you how to do that either. But I certainly appreciate any information that can help us try and identify how the various provincial models can demonstrate gender wage inequity or greater equity. And I'll pass it along to Ms. Sidhu the rest of my time.
Perfect. I just have I know you explained very well in this report how the changes are coming in there, but what is the current, you already explained that gender pay gap in Canada, and how has it changed in the past few decades? What is in your view has led to these changes? What is the circumstances?
So the current pay gap, right now, I think women earn on average about 87 cents for every dollar earned by men, and that's an hourly wage rate estimate. The article that cited why has the wage gap narrowed over time, in that particular study we looked at differences in education, job tenure, shifts in industry, shifts to higher paying occupations, occupational shifts of different age groups of workers, and some of those things account for about 60% of the reduction in the gap over time. I think too, in another particular study with Michael Baker, we calculated the adjusted pay gap over time, and we saw that in the late 1980s, the adjusted gap was much higher than the unadjusted gap, and by 2008 there was no difference between the adjusted gap and the unadjusted gap, and that has to do with the fact that the differences in explainable characteristics between men and women are no longer explaining the gender wage gap by 2008, and there's more differences in how the labor market compensates men and women. And there are several interpretations along with this finding. First of all, men and women could be paid more equally in 2008 compared to 1988. We've seen a widespread convergence in unobservable characteristics between men and women, and this would definitely be the case in work experience, which was not included in that particular study. And we see that the attitudes towards women at work have also changed in that time. So those are some leading factors explaining why the gender wage gap has changed between 1988 and 2008. Another potential factor is related to what we call a selection effect or a selection bias. And here we want to compare wages of men and women at two very different points in time, and the characteristics of people have been changing. And one case in point here is that the employment rates of women have increased substantially between 1988 and 2008. So you can imagine a situation where women, let's say in the late 1980s, have above average skills, and there's a massive influx of women with average skills. This tends to decrease the wages of all women. And then when you're looking at the wage gap over time, then it looks like the wage gap didn't reduce as much as if you compared the exact same characteristics of workers. So when you control for the selection effect, then the wage gap would have narrowed further by about 1.6 percentage points over that same period. And if you do the same analysis on unobserved components of the wage gap, then it could be as high as an additional 5%. So the wage gaps cited here could be a conservative estimate about the reduction in the wage gap over time.
And that's it for the time. So we will be moving on to Mr. Albus for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. Certainly appreciate the opportunity to just follow up with a few different things. So my earlier question to Ms. Hale in regards to provincial breakouts, so to speak, I think we always should be very careful that correlation does not imply causation, and that the counter-assumption that correlation proves causation. So, but I do think it would be helpful to have breakouts from across the country, but perhaps some analysis as to what some of those trends may come from. I'm not sure if they can be explained, because we've learned about the unexplained components of some of the research. But I do think it would be helpful. But I think we also have to bear in mind that by your presentation, the national average, the pay gap seems to be narrowing, whether you look at it from a variety of different lenses. That's what I take away is that on the whole, we're seeing a narrowing. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist, and I'm not saying that there's not room for us to work on it. But to me, that's what I take away from some of the presentation that's been here. Is that correct?
Yeah, the trend in the hourly wage rate is going up, yes.
Okay, no, that's helpful.
Sure.
Now, regarding earlier, my colleague, Ms. Claudio, had mentioned bonuses and there being no information as far as that. Is that something that can be implemented through a labor force survey or whatnot, or through general taxation when someone files their taxes? You could take note of that from an aggregated data viewpoint. How do we capture, that difference?
Information bonuses, we do get it at an aggregate level. We have it it's getting it at an individual level. It's more different. It wouldn't be in the labor force survey. We're only getting people's average wage at the time when they're in the survey. So doesn't quite work, because bonuses are very much an ad hoc.
So the aggregate data you do get, is that from taxation?
Yes.
Okay, and does that also allow you, that aggregate data, to compare between men and women?
No, it doesn't.
Okay, so that's a pretty big
We don't
gap.
have details, yeah.
So is that within your authority within StatsCan, or do you need a minister to direct you through an order in council to prepare a report that would be like that, or is it?
No, it's because the information is actually at a payroll level. The data isn't even available currently at a more disaggregated level, because currently to get that information, we're using payroll information that employers provide to Revenue Canada at an aggregate level. They don't provide that information at the employee level.
So how would you seek to get that information then? Would you feel that it would be useful towards addressing Ms. Glaudau's concern?
It gets down to whether employers could actually provide that information at an individual level. I mean, data would be in more detailed information is always of interest. It's the burden on whoever's providing that information has to be kept
and
into.
I totally understand the burden effect, because to me, the idea of proactive legislation, as much as that we want to crack that last remaining 10% and see true equality right across the board, and in some cases, in some other measures, it's slightly higher. But then again, I'd much rather, as a former small business person, just tell me what information you need, I'll send it to you, versus having to send out individual agencies to ask for the information that you may never have been tracked before as well, just to kind of deal with these things. So that's not really has to do with you.
Ms.
Back to the unexplained component, the gaps in data that leads to unknowns. I heard, Ms. Drillette, you mention if we had better data on wages, we could better explain wage gaps. And I'm paraphrasing, I think, maybe, but could you please explain that a little bit further? What gaps is StatsCan currently missing to help not just parliamentarians, but policymakers across the country to better understand the pay gap?
One case in point is the work experience. We have information on the amount of full-year, full-time work experience of men and women. which is a great indicator for wages. However, we're missing information on the continuity of that work experience, the frequency of labor force withdrawals, the timing of those withdrawals, and the duration of those withdrawals. So you can imagine a situation where a woman is anticipating frequent interruptions to her career, so she may be in lower wage jobs, jobs that are easier to exit and enter into, for example. So,
If you did have
having
that
more-
data, what kind of differences do you think? I know you can't say what data you'd get, but how would that give a group like this committee a better understanding of what things are?
Well, I think it would just give you a better idea of work histories and the different trajectories that people take throughout their careers and how their wages can progress throughout their lives.
And that's time. So thank you very much. We are moving to Mr. Sheehan for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and it's a great presentation, very insightful as well, and I was very pleased to also say happy Stats Day to you as well. We're really looking forward to it. But, this committee's been working really hard at this for the last little while, and we've heard a lot of different things, and we're looking at different areas that, where we're exploring. And in the world, we've been talking a lot about the provinces and the territories, but Iceland was considered to be one of the models for closing the gender gap. But there remains to be a persistent wage gap in rural areas. So I represent the riding of Sault Ste. Marie, which is the city, but then the rural area. And then Northern Ontario is obviously part of that, and there's rural. And the reason why I bring that up is because in Iceland, in particular, it's the natural resource sectors and the fisheries that are persistent still with a wage gap. So my question to you is there also a wider gender wage gap in rural areas of Canada and in certain economic sectors? If so, has this situation been improving in recent years?
I don't think I can comment on the rural areas. I think some of the studies I have seen, there is a breakdown by large CMA areas and other areas, so maybe that could inform you. In terms of certain economic sectors, pulling up some numbers today from our CanSim tables, we have hourly wage rates in 1997 compared to 2015, and you're commenting on the forestry, fishing, mining, oil and gas
Yeah, sure.
resource. So here we see that in 1997, women earned 83 cents for every dollar earned by men, and by 2015 it had gone up to 92 cents in that particular sector. So that was a gain of 8.2 percentage points. So we also saw large gains in the construction sector, and I think the construction was about almost 10 percentage points. So these are just, of course, unadjusted gaps unadjusted for anything. They're just raw gaps, but these types of numbers are readily available from our labor force survey that's on CanSim.
Okay. Anybody want to add any more? Because I have more questions. The other one question that I had was just relates to, and we'll go back to the province and the territories again, and we keep talking about the various statistics coming out of various areas. And in Ontario, the Pay Equity Act came in 1987. That was passed in 1987. And in Quebec, the Pay Equity Act was passed in 1996. And then, of course, we've heard about Manitoba, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, and the Northwest Territories. They also have pay equity legislation. So, again, just on those specific dates, and I wanted to hear in particular, from 1987 in particular for Ontario, 1996 for Quebec, what have we seen for the numbers, and how is it differentiated since these particular provinces that have enacted these legislations, both in the public sector and the private sector? So, if you care to comment on that.
don't really have anything by private and public. All we have, like I said, just the numbers from 1997 and 2015 in front of us. It's, basically across all the provinces, the ratio has gone, has shrunk, the difference between the ratio. But is there any, like I said, for both Quebec and Ontario, it's changed? Like, they've all basically gone up, but is there one in particular you were looking for? There was quite a few provinces. I could list off the numbers, but I think I'll provide those to the clerk later. And so you'll have them by province rather than name them off, I guess.
And that is the time.
One thing to mention is that, sorry.
Yeah, that's the time. We have one last question, and we have about 4 minutes for Mr. Albus. Sorry about that.
Shame on me. No, that's fine. So getting back to, and again, I just want to be clear is that, some of the stats, and by the way, a lot of these charts only go to 2008. Obviously, we keep hearing over and over it's 2016. So is there any plan to update some of the charts that you've given us here? Some of them go that far. Is there a reason why some of them just illustrate 1998 to 2008?
A lot of the supplemental slides go up to 2015. They were updated to 2015, but the more thorough analysis covered the 1988 to 2008 period. So the analysis wasn't redone up to 2015.
Okay. So now, when you look at some of the breakdowns you said earlier, PEI, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, obviously they have a much different regime in place legislatively than Quebec. So why is there also movement on those? Because it seems to be in those provinces they also reduced their gap. Is that from immigration? Is that from demographics? I'm trying to get a better understanding because we've heard from a number of people that continue to push on a proactive regime, and whether or not the proactive regime is the right, I guess the committee will decide. But it seems to me that we're seeing it right across the country where the pay gap is narrowing.
Now, to really understand what's going on in each province, you'd have to do the sort of analysis we were presenting by province, and I'm not aware of that having been done.
So is this something that StatsCan could issue a research project, engage academia or engage with your own internal resources? Because I would really hate for the committee to put forward recommendations that aren't evidence-based, but so far, and by the way, this has been probably, I would say, for me, the most helpful presentation we've had, just in terms of saying this is where you are on the roadmap. Just your thoughts on that.
It would be like a lot of the analysis that's in the first part of the deck is very sophisticated statistical analysis that takes a lot of time. That's probably beyond the time. From what I understand, this is a fairly short-lived committee. The things that are the straightforward data that we could update to 2015, that's based on information that's on our standard database that we can make available to the researcher, to the committee, who could just pull out some information that doesn't have that analysis, but you could look at straightforward tabulations for specific areas of interest that you could pull out, but you wouldn't be able to do the sort of analysis that would do these sort of, that you could get into that controlling for various things. Those are things that take months of research that is beyond what I think you could do in the time you have.
Okay. Well, how much time do I have? I just want to say again, I do appreciate the work you do, and the independent analysis I think is very important, particularly to this issue. Because I think we need to wrap our minds around, where we are, why we've gotten there, and what can take us forward. I would hate for us to deploy assets and resources and put burdens on Canadians that won't necessarily impact. I'm not saying again. I think we need to have better research so that we can make better decisions. But thank you.
And I want to thank Ms. Hale and Ms. Drollet for being here today. We are going to suspend for just a few minutes while we change panels and bring in the teleconference. So thank you very much. We're suspended. Call to order again. We're very, very pleased this evening. Thank you very much for coming, especially at this hour, that we have with us three separate panels, or three separate groups. We have the Canadian Bankers Association, and that is Marina Mandal, and she is the Assistant General Counsel of the Legal Branch. And from FETCO, we have Derek Hines, the Executive Director, and Elizabeth Cameron, the Vice Chair. And on video conference, we have from Saskatoon, from Van City Credit Union, Catherine Ludgate, Manager of Community Investment. So thank you very much for being here. And we will give each of you 7 minutes because there are so many panelists. And we will start with Marina from the Canadian Bankers Association.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for inviting us here to be here today with you today to contribute to your review of pay equity in federally regulated sectors. My name is Marina Mandel, and I am the Assistant General Counsel of the Canadian Bankers Association. The CBA represents 59 domestic banks, foreign bank subsidiaries, and foreign bank branches operating in Canada. The banking industry contributes significantly to job growth and to Canada's labour market. Banks and their subsidiaries employ over 280,000 Canadians. Banking is a knowledge-based industry that offers high-quality and well-paying jobs. Over 80% of jobs in the banking industry are full-time positions, and banks paid $24 billion in salaries and benefits to their employees in 2014. Banks' human resources policies and practices are at the leading edge. Many banks enhance their employees' personal lives with comprehensive benefit programs and pension plans, generous leave policies, and alternative work arrangements, such as flexible work schedules, job sharing, and telecommuting. Canada's banks are leaders at fostering diverse workplaces. Many of our members have formal and informal diversity policies, practices, and programs in place aimed at promoting diversity, and a bank's diversity strategy is often overseen by a senior advisory council. A workforce that is truly representative of the organization's external labor market and its customer base is something in which we strongly believe. Not only is building a diverse workforce the right thing to do, it also broadens a bank's ability to compete for top talent and respond to rapidly changing markets. Regarding gender diversity specifically, as of 2014, women constituted approximately 62% of the workforce at Canada's 6 largest banks, which is substantially more than other federally regulated sectors. The banking industry exceeds the government's benchmarks for representation of women at executive, professional, and middle management levels, with women making up 34.5% of all senior managers in banking, 50.4% of middle managers, and 50.5% of professionals. Canada's banks have been committed to the principles of pay equity for more than 35 years. Banks have refined their job evaluation and compensation systems to ensure that they are gender neutral and compliant with the Equal Wages Guidelines, which provide guidance on the pay equity provisions in the Canadian Human Rights Act. In order to ensure that compensation is gender neutral, banks have established internal pay equity plans and have implemented a number of policies and procedures to ensure equitable compensation for both men and women. This includes undertaking regular audits to identify pay differences, requiring that compensation decisions be based on a set of gender-neutral factors, conducting spot checks to ensure that there are no biases in the decisions regarding compensation, and conducting pay equity maintenance exercises to correct any salary gaps. Canada's banks strongly believe in equal pay for work of equal value and will continue our leadership in this area. As the committee has already heard previously, there is a distinction between pay equity and the gender wage gap. In addition to their efforts on pay equity, banks are minimizing the wage gap by implementing human resource strategies to encourage an increasing number of women to enter into senior executive roles. For example, banks have implemented staffing protocols to promote increased representation of women in senior positions, provide access to training and leadership development programs, and support initiatives that promote the advancement of women in banking. We understand that the committee has been mandated to propose a plan for the federal government to implement a new pay equity regime, either through legislation or other means. While the banking industry is supportive of pay equity, a more complex and prescriptive pay equity regime will not have the desired effect of closing the gender gap, wage gap in Canada. As you consider options moving forward, we would encourage the committee to take into account the following overarching principles in drafting its recommendations to the government. First, a new federal regime for pay equity must remain sufficiently flexible and take into account differences in the size of workforces among federally regulated employers, the types of businesses represented, corporate structure, and workforce composition. A one-size-fits-all approach is not appropriate for pay equity. Second, it should take into account the degree to which pay equity has already been achieved by an individual employer and not impose new rules and requirements where they're not needed. This will allow the government to focus on areas where outcomes need to be improved. Third, a new pay equity regime should build on existing precedents and structures. It is appropriate that the protection of the human right to be free from gender discrimination should remain with the Canadian Human Rights Commission. Lastly, it should be very clear about its objectives. The focus should be on eliminating systemic discriminatory practices in pay systems and on programs to increase development opportunities and promote the advancement of women broadly. In closing, the banks are fully committed to the principles of pay equity. Having a flexible, efficient, and effective regulatory framework would support the objectives of pay equity. Thank you again for the opportunity to present our views, and I look forward to our questions.
Et merci beaucoup, Madame Mandel. La prochaine témoignage, c'est...
Thank you very much, Ms. Mandel. The next testimony is from Mr. Hines.
Madam Chair, and good evening, everyone. Joining me today is Elizabeth Cameron, who is Vice Chair of FETCO, but also Vice President of Labour Relations at NAV Canada, a federally regulated firm. I'll provide opening comments, and we'll both be available for questions at the end of the presentation. For those of you that don't know, FETCO stands for Federally Regulated Employers, Transportation and Communications. I recognize that's a mouthful. FETCO member organizations are all federally regulated firms in the transportation and communications sectors. We have existed as an employers association for over 30 years. We are generally large employers in the federal sector, encompassing over 400,000 employees and representing well-known firms such as Air Canada, Bell, CN, CP, and TELUS, to name a few. FETCO is not one voice. We try to present positions on issues that accommodate the concerns of all of our members, but this is not always possible. As such, please accept the comments today as a collection of thoughts from many of our member companies. In the short timelines presented to us to report back to you on your work, this is what we can offer. Let us start by stating one clear fact. FETCO member organizations support the concept of pay equity. That is, equal pay for work of equal value. We firmly believe that closing the wage gap between men and women is important. This is the right thing to do, and it makes good business sense. FETCO members believe that while the current system for addressing pay equity complaints is not perfect, it is better than creating an entirely new system following the proactive model used in Ontario and in Quebec. When we polled FETCO members on the positive attributes of the current approach, we heard three clear messages. First, the current complaints-based approach has raised awareness about pay equity. Employers have a sense of responsibility and commitment to comply with the Canadian Human Rights Act, which specifically includes protection against wage discrimination based on gender. Employer awareness continues to grow through better knowledge, understanding, and application of some of the more technical aspects of gender analysis and job evaluation. These issues are all moving in the right direction. Second, it is important to note that the provisions of the Act which prohibit discrimination in general also protect the members of those groups against wage discrimination. In other words, prohibition on wage discrimination is already covered under the Act for the 11 protected groups, which include the employment equity designated groups, of which women, of course, are one such group. Third, the current approach has led to significant pay adjustments for women in the federal sector in the hundreds of millions of dollars. While our members may not agree with all aspects of the settlements that have emerged, we have seen the needle move in a number of areas via a number of cases. There has been progress under the current model. These are complicated cases that have at times taken years to resolve, but they are resulting in change. Now for a few challenges. First, pay equity complaints, as you know, tend to be protracted, confrontational, and costly. Pay equity is complex and resource-intensive to study and implement. Even larger and more sophisticated employers must engage expert consultants. And the Canadian Human Rights Commission is under-resourced in this area and therefore is often unable to investigate and process complaints in a timely way. Second, the current system can make collective bargaining relationships more complicated. Under the Canada Labour Code, parties enter into good faith bargaining to find an agreement on many matters, including compensation. A practical challenge emerges when, at the end of bargaining, unions can use Section 11 of the Act to launch a pay equity complaint against an employer. Third, some of our members raised issues with the exceptions listed under Section 16 of the Equal Wage Guidelines. There is a concern that Section 11 of the Canadian Human Rights Act assumes that nearly all pay variances must be attributed to gender discrimination. We suggest there may be other factors at play that contribute to wage gaps and would welcome an opportunity to research this further. FETCO members are generally not convinced that a proactive model is the solution. This would be costly and administratively cumbersome for both government and business. This model has not proven ideal in the jurisdictions in which it has been introduced. As an aside to this, we'd like to better understand the pros and cons of the proactive approach. At this point, there are more questions than there are answers. This approach would create a duplicate commission and tribunal to the Canadian Human Rights Commission and the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, which already have the structures and processes in place to handle such complaints, and with which all the parties are already familiar. We're not sure of the value in creating a whole new set of government entities when adequate infrastructure already exists. We suggest that government should commit to enhancing the role of the Canadian Human Rights Commission and improving the processes by which pay equity complaints are administered, including injecting additional resources. As employers, we would like to be part of the solution. We believe consultation and study should continue to be pursued, and we are big advocates of this work being done under the tripartite model where government, business, and labor collaborate on finding solutions. We believe the best way to tackle the issue of pay equity is to take a comprehensive approach that addresses the root causes of wage disparity between men and women. Raising awareness about the issue and processes available, both internal and external, among employees should also be considered. We do not believe this is an issue that can be solved overnight by a one solution. In addition to addressing discrete challenges with the current complaints-based approach, we suggest other areas on which the parties can collaborate. For example, we could study the root causes of the wage gap, support labor market research that forecasts demand for skills, allowing educational institutions and organizations to proactively plan for roles and income within industries, sponsor activities to attract women to non-traditional fields where they are currently underrepresented, science, technology, engineering, and math, the STEM sectors, via apprenticeship programs or other educational resources. Provide educational opportunities for employers to ensure that any gender stereotypes and biases are removed from all human resource activities. Support initiatives to promote women in leadership roles, to ensure effective paths exist for women to advance within organizations across the public or private sectors. And finally, reward organizations that increase their diversity. This is what we believe a system of the future looks like. 3 parties coming to the table, problem solving, and jointly improving the current approach via comprehensive analysis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hines, and right on time. We now have Ms. Ludgate, who is coming to us via video conference from Saskatoon. And Ms. Ludgate, you have 7 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you for inviting me to speak with you. I'm Catherine Ludgate. I'm a manager in the community investment team at Van City Credit Union based in Vancouver. I'm actually in Saskatoon at a conference of all credit unions. I'm Van City's lead on our own adoption of the living wage and its advocate to other employers to adopt the living wage. So this committee knows the statistics about pay inequality in Canada and has heard and will hear from many more experts offering analysis and tools. I'm here to talk about one of the tools that employers can use to address pay equity and the poverty that results from low-waged work. As the Globe and Mail recently reported, in quotes, women are lagging at both the bottom and the top of the pay scale. At the lower end, women are more likely to earn minimum wage, to work part-time, and to live on low income, particularly if they are Indigenous or a visible minority. Erratic scheduling and insecure work makes life more difficult, especially for single moms, end of quote. And that was from just a couple of months ago in the Globe. Many discussions about pay equity focus on the glass ceiling and the inequity of pay in middle-income management and leadership roles. Of course, this must be addressed. But let us not forget about those workers who work full-time, year-round in minimum wage jobs, many of which are gendered roles, such as hospital workers, service workers, retail sales agents, clerical agents, and janitors. This group of critical services are populated in large measure by women. The voluntary adoption of the living wage, in the absence of adequate minimum wages and important social programs such as universal and accessible childcare, is one tool that employers themselves can use to improve the working conditions for women at the bottom of the pay spectrum in Canada. It is a proactive model. It is within the reach of most employers. It is being adopted by credit unions across the country. It simply and directly addresses the low wages that are paid to some of the most vulnerable workers, some of the most vulnerable women in our communities. So I'd like to focus on the connection between low-wage work, inequality, and poverty for the remainder of my remarks. Canada, a country of very rich resources of all kinds, natural and environmental, social capital and community, education and technological, is a country with a poverty crisis. By its own reporting, StatsCan notes that 1 in 7 Canadians live in poverty, almost 5 million people. And in a 25-year period from 1980 to 2005, average earnings for the lowest paid Canadians fell by 20%. In my home province of British Columbia, 1 in 5 citizens now lives in poverty, and the majority of those are working full-time, full year. What is to be done? Well, we need federal and provincial poverty reduction strategies, and we desperately need a federal housing strategy and a universal child care strategy. But concurrent with citizen advocacy to press for better public policy, employers ourselves can play a role in addressing poverty and inequity in our communities. And one of the best tools available to employers is the adoption of the living wage. The living wage is a calculation of what it costs for a family of 4 with 2 income earners and 2 small children to address the cost of childcare to make basic ends meet. In Metro Vancouver, that wage is now calculated at $20.64 per hour. That wage is comprised of base pay offered by an employer and the value of non-mandatory payroll benefits such as extended medical or transportation allowance. The wage is updated each year based on a transparent methodology developed by the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. It calculates inputs such as housing, transportation, childcare, food, household supplies, an education budget for parents, and some costs of social participation, such as enrolling children in limited after-school activities. The living wage is not a luxurious wage. It doesn't include paying off any existing debt, nor saving for retirement, nor saving for one's children's education. It simply covers the cost of getting by at 1 full-time job per adult worker. In BC, we calculate that living wage includes almost $4 an hour to cover the very high cost of childcare, and the $1 an hour to cover the co-pay aspect of our provincial medical insurance program. With better public policy and programs around accessible childcare and medical premiums, the living wage would be reduced to closer to $15 an hour, in line with various calls for an increased minimum wage across the country. In the absence of those public programs, the voluntary payment of the living wage is how employers can address poverty and pay inequity in our communities. My credit union became a living wage employer in 2011 and is proud to have recertified each year at the new living wage rate. We actively encourage other employers, and particular credit unions, to join us as living wage employers as a best practice for employers. By the end of 2015, 7 credit unions across Canada had become living wage employers, and now we are 8. We learned a lot as we became a living wage employer. We learned that where we had subcontracted out for labor supports, for janitorial, security, temp agency, and offsite catering, those workers who served us were making minimum wage, and those jobs were largely gender-based. The janitorial staff were working at 2 or 3 jobs, at another workplace during the day, and then cleaning our buildings at night. As we moved to paying a living wage through those subcontracts, those janitorial staff no longer have to work at multiple low-wage jobs. Janitorial staff can now work at 1 fair-paying job, and those moms now have time to participate in the lives of their families, to read to their children, and play with their kids. The security staff can now make food choices they hadn't been able to make before and can look after aging parents. For our own staff, pride in who we are as an employer increased. Universally, for living wage employers, the experience is that the cost of attraction, recruitment, and retention goes down significantly. Productivity goes up. Morale improves. In fact, morale improves for everyone as employers create more just, equitable, and inclusive workplaces. Thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the committee for inviting me to speak today about the living wage. The voluntary payment of the living wage by employers is both the right thing to do and is a best practice in addressing pay equity for low-income earners. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I forgot to mention to the committee that a brief from Ms. Ludgate has been circulated, so you should have her brief in front of you. Thank you to all the witnesses, and we will start our questioning now, and we'll start with the first round. It's 7 minutes to Ms. Sidhu.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, panelists, to being with us. I will share my time with the mate. And my first question is to Canadian Banker Association. Many of your members are large corporations with considerable resources, but some of your members, such as trucking companies, are smaller organizations. Some countries with a pay equity system allow small companies more time to establish pay equity plans, allow less detailed reporting, and provide a longer timeline to connect pay inequities. What will be the effect on your member being required to implement and report on maintaining pay equity plans? And the second question is, if implementing these changes would be a challenge for some members, what, if anything, should be done to support such companies?
Sorry, just to clarify, was the question for the Canadian Bankers Association or FEDCO?
Any of them, you can give the answer for that.
Okay, I'm happy to start. So, thank you for the question, and I think you're absolutely right. We haven't formulated detailed views on that, but one of the principles I mentioned in my opening remarks was flexibility, and flexibility to the type of operations and to the size of the workforce. So, when people think of Canadian banks, they think of the big five or the biggest six, but we do have small bank members. Small bank members have their subsidiaries that are not always run in the same way as the parent bank. So, I think looking at that type of flexibility is really valuable, and looking at models in other jurisdictions that adopt flexibility.
Okay. And other one is that what is the current gender composition of your member companies? Has it changed over the past decades?
I actually just looked at the numbers. So the short answer is yes, but the numbers I have in front of me are actually for the senior manager, middle management professional roles. So in the senior manager, it went up approximately 14% since 2004 to 2014. The representation of women, middle management, it went up, I believe, 6%. And then there was a drop off in the professionals category, which we suspect is probably because of the migration of professionals up into management roles. But if that is data the committee wants, we can definitely look into it. I just don't have it collected in front of me.
Thank you. Over to the Matt.
Just to say, we also don't have that data at our fingertips right now, but if it was information that would be of interest to the committee, we could certainly reach out to our members and ask them for that sort of information.
Okay. And if you do send further information, please send it to the clerk, and if possible, by the end of the week, because we will be starting our deliberations on our report. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. DeCourcy?
How much time, Madam?
You have 4 minutes.
Okay, briefly before I flip it to Ms. Dillon, I noted comments around, I think, Mr. Hines, you mentioning that you weren't sure about the effect of proactive legislation in Ontario and Quebec having reduced the wage gap. And we just had a presentation that demonstrated a variety of different measures that do help reduce the wage gap. But I think we also saw some evidence that the proactive legislation has helped as well in those big provinces. I wonder, do you have conflicting evidence or information that might suggest otherwise? Or is there other contexts that lead you to maybe question whether proactive legislation does have the desired effect of reducing the wage gap?
Yeah, two things. That's a great question. Certainly when we did our research in preparing for this presentation and in consulting with our member companies, we could find little evidence that suggested a great success for the proactive model in terms of reducing the wage gap. And what I did find really interesting, secondly, from the presentation that we heard earlier, was the data that the StatsCan folks presented comparing Ontario to the rest of Canada. So Ontario would be under the proactive model, and generally speaking, in Canada, we wouldn't be. And the wage differential, in terms of the changes there, are almost identical, which does lead me to sit back and think, are there other factors at play here? Do we need to get in a situation where we throw out the current system and bring in a proactive approach, thinking it might be the right thing to do if we don't really have high quality data that justifies one action or the other?
I can just pass the last minute and a half to Ms. Dillon. Sorry there, Linda.
My question is for...
Okay, is it, I guess, Ms. Lapointe? Ms. Dillon. Okay.
Yes. The question is for Marina Mundell.
on page 3 where you read your statement, third, a new pay equity regime should be built on existing precedents and structures. It is appropriate that protection of the human right to freedom from gender discrimination should remain with the Canadian Human Rights Commission. Can you please elaborate on that?
Sure. If I understand the question correctly, why we put that position forward is because it's a human right.
Okay. And the existing precedents and structures, which would you use?
So, you know, in putting that comment together, we were really thinking of some of the recommendations in the 2004 report, Task Force on Pay Equity report. And the concern was the suggestion by the task force was to create a new piece of legislation, a new Pay Equity Commission, a new tribunal. And Derek referred to this in his comments as well. That throws out a lot of the processes everyone is familiar with. It throws out a lot of the precedents. There's also a pay equity office under the labor program. There's a authority in the Canada Labour Code for inspectors from the Labour Program to look into a workplace and assess pay equity. So those are two avenues, legislatively, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of how familiar banks and other employers are with their processes that are already in place. So it's not clear to us what the need is for a whole new apparatus, legislative, process-wise, infrastructure-wise, to achieve the goal that, again, like I said, it's a human right, and it is enshrined in the Act. So that was our reference to building on existing systems and precedents.
Next, Ms. Gladue, and you have 7 minutes.
Very good, and welcome to all of our panel members for being here. My first question is for Marina Mandel. If I heard you correctly, you were saying that within the banking nationally, you've achieved 50.5% at the lowest ranks, 50.4% women in the middle ranks, and about 6% of women in the senior ranks, which sounds like gender parity for the middle and the bottom, and a pretty good improvement in the right direction for senior management. And you've done it nationally, which sort of interested in me because we were thinking about the legislation in various areas, but not all provinces are legislated, and yet you've been able to achieve it. So I wondered if you could comment on the elements that you think helped you in the absence of legislation in closing the gap.
So thank you for the question. It's just one nuance. So the numbers I quoted, and these are numbers that are reported under the employment equity data collection requirements, 34.5 for senior management, and then gender parity on middle managers and professionals. So, once the Human Rights Act was there, Section 11 prohibits discrimination on the basis of gender. When the equal wage guidelines, even before that, but especially when the equal wages guidelines came out, and that is national legislation that applies on a national basis, banks put a lot of effort into pay equity programs, ensuring they're compliant with the law. And as things have evolved, from our perspective, and you've had other people, other witnesses before committee, including StatsCan earlier, that have talked about unexplained factors, other sort of what I would call, or maybe reference as, sociocultural or sociological factors. So I can't speak to that, but I can say that from our industry's perspectives, one of the concerns has been that, broadly speaking, for all Canadian companies, part of the pay gap is, and StatsCan, effectively confirmed this, is not enough women in senior roles. So there's been really a lot of efforts made. I mean, I've got lists of the kinds of programs banks have in place to attract women, to recruit them. So targeted recruitments at universities, mentorship programs in the STEM sectors with women in the STEM sectors that Derek referenced. Starting at that point, and then over the years, leadership, what's called pipelining at the banks, identifying people that are women that would be seen as having a career trajectory that pulls them into a senior role. Just a lot of fostering women's advancement because of obviously the correlation between a senior role in an organization and a higher wage.
Excellent. I do support promoting women in STEM, especially. I'm the first female engineer in the House of Commons. So my other question was, back to this Human Rights Commission thing, because we've heard a lot of testimony that suggests that any complaints that go to the Human Rights Commission take, I think we heard 6 to 15 years, and sometimes longer by the time people get paid out and cost millions of dollars. But yet, Mr. Hines and Ms. Mandel, both of you suggested that is the right mechanism. Can you comment on how you'd like to see that work, or is it exactly as we see in the past with Air Canada and Bell, I think, are two of the examples that went there?
Yeah, so there are examples, and no denying that they took a long time, and that's not great. We would like to see that improve. And what we do wonder is, are there things that we could consider to speed up those processes, to accelerate them, to make them more efficient, rather than throwing it all out? We do see, and the StatCan data from earlier this afternoon verified this, that the gap is narrowing. Do we still have a problem? Absolutely, that we need to address. And certainly representing our member organizations, it's one that we take seriously and want to address, because it's the right thing to do. But throwing it all out because it takes a long time or costs a lot, we're just not sure that's the best approach when we have mechanisms in place, structures in place, infrastructure in place, processes that people understand. What we think we need to do is put our heads together and make those processes better, because the evidence is not clear that going another route is necessarily going to be any better. It's definitely going to be more costly and cumbersome, and it's going to be a whole new bureaucracy that we're all going to have to learn how to use. So we do think there's potential, and as I said in my presentation, we'd like to be part of that solution. We think employers, 21st century employers, get this and are already putting mechanisms in place, and Marina has referenced them. We certainly have examples from our member companies too, to address these gaps and to make this better.
Anything to add to that, Ms. Mento?
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is that sometimes this maybe gets a bit lost in the conversation, but employers also do not like long, protracted battles at tribunals and courts. So it is definitely in the interest of all sides to have disputes resolved as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I think there's something that needs to be done there.
Oh, questions. Ms. Ludgate, are you interested in answering some of these questions, or would move on?
You know, I don't have information to offer on the gender breakdown of credit union employees across the country, so if that's of interest to the committee, I can ask colleagues to send that in for the end of the week, but I can't specifically comment on that.
If you do want to ask a question, just raise your hand, so that, because there's a bit of a time lag, and so I may...
Okay.
Okay, and sorry, go
still
ahead, and
have
I'll add the extra time.
Okay, good. So my other question has to do, oh, now I forgot my question. It's about the different sizes of business and not making a big bureaucracy when you implement a pay equity thing, that large businesses and small businesses are different. And I noticed Ms. Mandel had talked about having a pay equity committee and audits and spot checks. Can you give me some guidance as to how you see this happening in a smaller organization as opposed to a larger organization?
I will try. I think, I think some of those elements that the banks have identified for me as things that they do should be relatively easily achievable for a smaller organization. So whether it's annual internal review or periodic reviews, I think what becomes more challenging for smaller organizations or smaller companies just because of resourcing issues is building out a whole a whole audit system, a whole reporting system that's prescribed and heavily prescribed by law, which is why we keep going back to flexibility for organizations and building on existing systems. Banks, smaller banks, obviously, they also have pay equity plans in place. So, yeah, I think the answer is, if you're looking at proposing a model, I think flexibility is really what helps some of the smaller companies that might struggle a bit, and gets the outcome as well, right? Rather than employers sort of losing heart and not being able to keep up with the legislation.
Thank you.
And next question goes to Ms. Benson, and you have 7 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Nice to see you again, Mr. Hines. I'm following you around here. First, I'll go to the Canadian Bankers Association, and I want to clarify a couple things in your report. When the percentages are representation, when you're talking about the middle lower, it's not about pay equity.
No.
Okay.
No. So
that's fair enough. I just wanted to make that note. And I think the other clarification that's important for me with the Bankers Association and perhaps with some comment that Mr. Hines had made, and that is that in the 2004 Pay Equity Task Force, there is a whole piece there that talks about being flexible with, smaller and larger employers. So some of that is addressed. But to the both of you, I'm wondering if you can let us know how you are doing as industries on pay equity. And I'm not talking about wage discrimination. That's illegal. So if Derek and Elizabeth are doing the same thing and I'm paying Elizabeth $5 and Derek's getting $10, that's illegal, and I think we all understand it. But the next thing is when the fact that women are in a workforce or in a particular area, and that brings the wage down, and then you find equal work of equal value not happening. So I'm just wondering, how do you know how well, like, bankers have been committed to the principles of pay equity for 35 years. So I'm wondering, how do you know how well you're doing? And I would ask the same of FEDCO. Like, where are you at? Where's your own statistics?
So just on pay equity, so equal pay for equal value work, separating that out from wage gap. So like you alluded to, I think, it's the law. Right. So since
I just have to clarify, wage discrimination is illegal. So that's the description I gave with Elizabeth and Derek. But we're talking about equal pay for work of equal value. Yeah. So I'm just wondering which adds to the gap, the wage gap. So I just wondered, how does the Canadian Bankers Association know how well you're doing on that front?
So really, the way the banks have approached it is to is at the origin point, right, of the compensation. So I think I mentioned a few of these, and so at the starting point, it's gender neutral job evaluation, right? The Hay method, which a lot of, not just banks, a lot of corporations globally use.
You know how well you're doing though.
So,
like, is there no issue within banks, or how close are you, or because it comes to the point of, particularly in lots of cases, is how long do we have to wait for, no offense, but employers to get their act together to address it? And so asking for more statistics and that kind of thing, it's hard for us to say to people, well, we got to wait and do another study. So I'm just wondering if you actually know, either of you, how well you're doing in this area.
That's a great question. What I will say on behalf of the member organizations within the organization that I represent, we are 18 large employers that are federal. And most, if not all, are heavily unionized. And I don't know if Stats Canada has run data on this, but from reading some of the literature, my sense is the gaps are narrower within heavily unionized settings. And when I was talking to some of our member companies over the past couple of weeks preparing to come to speak to you today, I got a lot of positive feedback from HR professionals who have been around for a while and have seen the world change in this area. Do they have stats that they could give me to say it's 10% better than it was when I started in my job in HR? No. But certainly there was a very positive vibe, if you will, around the way pay equity is a part of the conversation and the way HR systems are organized around job evaluations, joint job evaluations, these sorts of things. I think there's a sophistication to it now that might not have existed 25 or 30 years ago. And I believe that's revealing itself in the data because the gap is narrowing. Are we there? Absolutely not. So I read some of the transcripts from the previous committee meetings that you've held, and I know some of the union leaders have said, get off your wallets, companies, and fix this, right? Fix this. We believe that the issue is a bit more complex than one simple fix, which is sort of the tone of our presentation. But overall, the feedback that I received in soliciting feedback from the member companies was that it is a lot better and things are improving.
I guess the other piece I think is that it is important. that there is a responsibility on employers, if in fact you're saying it's a priority, then to be able to demonstrate that. Because what we've heard, from the complaints-based system, even from the Human Rights Commission, is they don't have the expertise. It's long and drawn out. Some of those people had died before they got their thing. That's not okay. And so it's not a whole new system. It's a system that would be more efficient and effective with the expertise you need to do that kind of thing, with the flexibility that Ms. Mandel had talked about, and that is similar to occupational health and safety, that there would be sort of an ability to be within a bigger framework with more expertise, more, sort of focused in the area so you'd actually move quicker. So, obviously you can tell what I think of the 2004. I think there's a lot of good stuff and we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Any comment on that?
I guess my comment would be that, I definitely don't want to give the impression that we have come into this appearance with our minds made up, right? That at least for the banks, what we'd want to do is look at the details, look at where we can avoid duplicating or reinventing the wheel. So on one hand, totally understand the point about the requisite expertise needed, and there's maybe other ways to handle that, like having those people at the Human Rights Commission versus a brand new commission. So just the devil's in the details sort of thing that we would definitely, as an industry, and I'm sure others around the table, would want to take a close look at what's being proposed and what the consequences, intended or otherwise, could be for employers and employees.
Okay, and that's time. So we will now go to Ms. Zarowitz for 7 minutes.
Thank you so much. First, I'd like to say thank you to all three presenters. It was excellent. Ms. Mandel and Mr. Hines, you have indicated, Ms. Mandel, that banks have, and I'm going to ask all my questions at once. You guys can kind of sort of put your thoughts together. Ms. Mandel, you've mentioned that banks have made progress on pay equity. And Mr. Hines, you've indicated that the gap is narrowing. And I'm following up on Ms. Benson's point. I'm a very big believer that is what is not measured is not going to be worked on, and progress cannot be made. And I would highly recommend that if there are any statistics that gives us any indication that banks have actually made progress on equal work of equal value, that is something that is given to our committee. I'm a little bit worried that wasn't presented today. That would be a very key thing to present. The second thing I want and the second thing I want to say, I should let you know I am a former bank executive. And so I'm very familiar with banks. I've spent the majority of my life working in the banking industry and at very senior levels. So I want to indicate that in my experience, unless there is a roadmap and a game plan, an executive champion and accountability, transparency and reporting on progress and rewards on progress, things aren't going to happen at the bank. And so I'd like to know whether or not that is actually happening at each of the banks. And if so, if you could relay where the progress is of all the banks. So that's my first set of questions. My second is, with all due respect, Mr. Hines, more reports and study is not needed. The train has left the station. In 1977, pay equity was made a human right in Canada. And the reason we actually have this pay equity committee, in my personal opinion, is because we haven't made the progress we should have made on pay equity thus far. Now, even in saying all of that, I will say to you, I care a lot about costs for banks, and I care a lot about costs for businesses. This means something to me. I care about our economy. So you have indicated, Mr. Hines, that it is costly to put in a proactive model, and it will be prohibitively from the administrative perspective. What data do you have, or what more information can you give us on both of those fronts?
You want me to go first? Sure. To answer that question, I don't actually have concrete data to say it's X numbers of dollars to do this or X numbers of dollars to do that. And I don't disagree with you that I believe you said the train has left the station. We've been researching this issue for many years. The 2004 report, which is 600 pages long and has dozens and dozens of recommendations, was clearly a substantial piece of work. FETCO, my predecessor, was quite involved in that process. We didn't necessarily agree with all the key recommendations that came out of it, but we certainly were a part of it. So I guess in terms of measuring the overall impact of where we need to go next when we look at proactive versus the current model, what we're saying is we have a system right now under the Canadian Human Rights Commission. It's not perfect, but it does exist. And if government is going to, and we're not just talking about the cost to business, we're talking about the cost to government. If government is going to invest in something new to try and take this further and narrow this gap even more, which we all agree is a great idea, we question whether or not building a whole new system under a whole new bureaucracy is necessarily the thing to do. For us, it was just sort of common sense to think if we're going to build a whole new thing, that's likely going to cost us more. We're all going to have to learn the new processes to make that work, and it's going to take more time to figure it all out than if we try and improve the processes that currently are in place to try and bridge those gaps.
I would just say, Mr. Haynes, if there's any way that the costs or the administrative burden can be articulated to us, that would be very helpful. Our mandate is to create a proactive pay equity model, and so I know from my own perspective, I want to be as helpful as possible and very considerate of our business community and our banking industry and anybody in that field. Do you have anything to add, Ms. Mandel?
I generally agree with Derek's comments. I guess to add, and you had talked about, given your experience at a bank, the road mapping and the game plan and having it be a priority. So it is for the banks. It's a priority as part of a broader talent recruitment and management. The banks have offices, departments, they're named differently, of diversity and inclusion. So it's not just women, it's other designated groups under the Employment Equity Act. This is for the banks. It is a really important part. It's a very heavily knowledge-based industry, and recruiting the top talent in a small labor market pool, relatively, like Canada's, is a priority. So I guess I just wanted to confirm that point. I don't think I had anything to add to what Derek had said beyond that.
I think the only thing for me to reiterate is what is not measured is not going to be worked on. So we need some data. So if there's been great progress on equal work of equal value, please pass it along to us. If banks are they've got the roadmap, the accountability, and the champions, and the transparency and the progress, I would also like some data on that. That's the only way that at least I know that we've measured progress in banks and various different things, and that's what I'd also be looking for. If I have any time left, I'd like to give it to Ms. Lapointe. Ms. Lapointe.
Merci beaucoup. Alors, bonjour.
Good evening. I'm very happy to be with you this evening. I have a question for Mr. Hines. Earlier, you gave a proposal for a solution, and you would like to see organizations that are succeeding be rewarded with respect to pay equity. How would you look at implementing that, and what are your suggestions?
Question. What we were really envisioning there when we raised that point, we were thinking largely of small and medium-sized enterprises. I mean, FETCO, the companies that we represent, are very large and certainly have the models and the tools and the resourcing in place to do whatever is required in the event that the system changes. I mean, we're not going to cry poor and say that we can't accommodate, because clearly we can. But there are hundreds, maybe thousands, of small and medium-sized enterprises across the federal system who will have to accommodate this approach. So we're thinking of things like tax credits, some sort of tax incentives to reward, rather than use a stick all the time to punish those who don't actually follow the rules. Could there be tax credits, tax incentives, award ceremonies, some way to sort of raise the profile of this issue amongst those who may not have the resources to accommodate all the needs under the system?
Thank you very much, Mr. Hines. And we have a question to Mr. Albus for 5 minutes. From
Madam
Mr.
Chair,
Albus.
and I do appreciate all witnesses being here. Unfortunately, because of time constraints, I won't be able to spend time with you all. First of all, I'm going to go to Mr. Hines. It seems to me that we heard earlier from StatsCan that there wasn't a burning, there wasn't a silver bullet they could point to for the reason why the pay gap is slowly closing. And they actually said that there were gaps in their ability to understand through lack of data, et cetera, what those reasons were vis-a-vis certain provinces that have certain legislative directives, proactive versus the reactive style. So to me, it doesn't seem to be, your comments on really the burden of proof should be on the government side that, that there has been progress, but it can't be pointed to a proactive regime. Do you think that's a reasonable statement?
Yes, I think that is reasonable. I think that the data shows that nationally the gap is narrowing. And as I stated earlier in my presentation, we honestly don't have our heads in the sand on this issue because we do believe there is a problem. There still is a gap that needs to be addressed. What we believe is that there are a multitude of factors that might contribute to that gap and that we don't fully understand it. And while I recognize there are some that don't want to do more studies, I get that, we believe that there are still questions that are unanswered that would help us better understand. But to your point, yes, I agree. There is no clear indication under whatever system which is better than the other because the trends seem to be headed in the same direction.
And I also think it's unreasonable to say to people that are being regulated, you tell us the cost of a program we're going to implement on you. I don't think that's a reasonable thing. I think that, and maybe I'm not being completely fair here, but the burden of proof should be on those that wish to implement and have the resources to be able to show. Now, my understanding is that from your presentation, Ms. Mandel, 280,000 Canadians are employed by you. Is that correct? Okay, that's almost a third of the 874,000 private sector employees that are federally regulated.
Sounds right.
That's about right. Mm-hmm. How much, Mr. Hines, how much of your membership, how many employees would you say that you represent?
It's in and around 400 to 450,000. So
Okay.
between the two of us, we constitute a large portion of federally regulated employees. Sorry.
Okay. And one thing I think that unfortunately, if you remember the prior testimony from Employment and Social Development Canada, there was talk about how different federally regulated different industries are. And I think it's unfortunate, and I blame myself, Madam Chair, because I didn't think of it, to invite the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, because I'm sure there are some smaller businesses that are not there. Are they?
Yes, they declined the invitation.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Because it would be nice to hear, because quite frankly, I understand, Mr. Hines, you represent some larger companies. Ms. Mandel, you obviously represent some very large companies as well. Now, Ms. Mandel, there was some concerns from Ms. Derowitz in regards to the roadmap or how serious banks are taking in, and notwithstanding her experience, because I think that's extremely important for members of Parliament to bring their relevant work experience here. Would you be willing to ask one of your member banks to see if perhaps, obviously there'd be proprietary concerns, and so this would have to be done in camera, but if the committee was able to ask for some documentation, just so we can see, because my understanding of working, I know various bank managers over the years, and usually when a new policy comes in from the head office, it's accompanied by a binder, yay thick, and lots of paper in it, and it's expected to be done by Friday. So a lot of these, there's a lot of extensive work, and I think that we should bear in mind some of the testimony here, that we have 2/3, if not larger, of the private sector groups represented here are telling us that maybe we should look at improvements. So between, whether there's been talk of a streamlined process or some policy, perhaps some tweaking of the current regime, new resources, the fact that they're, we all want to see disputes. Is there any other suggestions that this committee could look at? And I'm not saying no to a proactive legislative approach, but I am saying that perhaps we need to do a little more research to get our burden of proof to say that this is the silver bullet.
And actually, I'm sorry, Mr. Albus, but that is your 5 minutes. Oh. And so the answer to that question, if you wanted to submit something in writing, certainly that could be done in camera as well.
I'm sorry.
Il reste juste 2 minutes. Et...
There are only 2 minutes remaining, and it is for Ms. Lapointe. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I have a question for Madame Mandel. a bit earlier, Madame Gladue raised a question. What surprised me in your introduction is that in the investigative system, 62% were women, and in upper management, 40% were women, and in intermediate ranks, if I understood, it was 42%. If I understood correctly, you said that you had a program and were making efforts to target program. You were going after talent to break through the glass ceiling. How do you explain that there is such a large difference when we know that banks have mainly female employees, and there are so few men in the upper ranks, even though you say there are programs to target talent in the lower ranks? We spoke about it earlier, but I would like to hear your thoughts on how you could improve the situation so that in 5 years, 50% of women will be among the upper ranks of management.
Just a point of clarification on some of those numbers. I think you have them right. 62% overall at the 6 largest banks, and then in middle management and professionals, 50%. It's 50.4 and 50.5, and then 34.5% of all senior managers. So if I understand the question correctly, it's, why is it still not at parity perhaps for the senior management roles?
Ça fait quand même longtemps que les banques, c'est des emplois occupés principalement.
Well, these jobs have been occupied by women for a long time in the banking sector.
So, it is the case that the amount of administrative and business support positions, obviously at the banks, are huge. They're a much, much larger number than the number of senior roles available for men or for women. And I think, really, this is a focus for the banks. It is a focus for HR. It is, there's I can read out the amounts of things that the banks are doing. I have it all in front of me. Outreach programs, leadership training. Banks will map what they call the gender cliff, which is at which point, while rising through an organization, women drop off. And then they have pinpointed that point in time at whatever position that is, and they specifically target that to see if they can improve opportunities for training or development for those women.
Thank you very much. We're already 1 minute over, and we have the other panel waiting. But I would encourage, if you did have anything to add, to please send it to the clerk, and you can send it in writing, and the committee can review that. And I do want to thank all of our panelists, including Ms. Ludgate from Saskatoon, and those that are here in person. Thank you so much for coming. And we are going to suspend for just a few minutes while we change panels and bring in the next video conference. So thank you very much. Again, and thank you very much to the witnesses for coming at this late hour, and also to the committee members. And we have with us here Serena Fong, who is the Vice President of Government Affairs for Catalyst. And then by video conference from Saskatoon, we have again Beth Bilson, who has testified before, and welcome back to the committee. Thank you very much for coming back. And also from video conference from Toronto, Janet Borowy, who is a member and lawyer of Cavaluzo, Shulton, McIntyre, Cornish LLP. And I do believe that you have submitted a brief, Ms. Borowy, and that brief is in translation, so the committee members haven't received it yet, but they will receive it as soon as it's translated. Also for Professor Bilson, if there's anything that you testified on last time that you wanted to add, please feel free in your opening remarks to add to that as well. And we will be giving each of you 7 minutes because of the number of panelists. We will start with Ms. Fong with 7 minutes.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chairperson and committee members, for the opportunity to provide on such input on such an important issue. I'm Serena Fong, Vice President of Government Affairs. It is a distinct honor for me to be here representing Catalyst. Our goal as a nonprofit organization is to help businesses around the world build workplaces where women and men of all backgrounds have equal opportunities to succeed. I'll be focusing my remarks from the perspective of working with organizations to close the worldwide gender gaps in wages, leadership, and opportunity in the hopes of providing further context for your deliberations. Our research, along with that of many others, shows that wage inequality starts early in most women's careers and worsens over time. In fact, Canadian high-potential women earned approximately $8,000 less than men in their first post-MBA job and were more likely than men to start at a lower-level position. Women are also offered fewer career-accelerating work experiences and international job postings. These missed opportunities significantly contribute to the gender wage gap. Clearly, the pay gap is all too real, and unless we act now, it's not going anywhere. There is some positive news about the gender wage gap. These days, unequal wages usually don't happen intentionally. Outright discrimination when it comes to wages in the workplace is not nearly as prevalent. Wage and other gender gaps exist due to systemic barriers and unconscious biases. The majority of talent recruitment, development, and management systems aren't designed to correct early inequities, nor will giving it time even the playing field for women and men. Only intentional actions by both the business community and the government will help close these gaps. Pay transparency is one such action that can narrow the wage gap. It provides women with the information they need to better negotiate for fair and equal pay. Government mandates requiring companies to publicly disclose salaries and/or gaps between women and men's wages, such as the UK government's regulations and Australia's legislation requiring companies to report on the remuneration of their employees, are examples of ways to achieve pay transparency. Similarly, organizational policies disclosing exact wages, stock option data, salary bands, and pay levels have been found to be effective pay transparency methods. Yet pay transparency alone won't close all the gaps or break down every barrier to workplace equality. Numerous studies show that when women negotiate for higher salaries, people react more negatively than they would to a man asking for more money. No negotiation policies and a focus on paying for the work and not the potential can help combat these and other biases. For example, in the United States, the federal government's Office of Personnel Management, which is the government's HR department, recently issued a memo advising other agencies not to rely on salary history when determining compensation. Doing so could adversely affect a candidate who's either returning to the workforce after an extended leave or their existing salary isn't reflective of their qualifications or the market rate, perhaps due to systemic gender biases. Organizations should conduct equal pay audits on an ongoing basis in order to identify and correct anomalies based on gender. Once the audit is done, bring in an external organization to verify the findings. Policies and actions like these benefit employers by providing companies with the tools and knowledge needed to set salary rates appropriately. They also aid job seekers in determining whether they want to work for a particular organization and rightfully take the onus off women, who are often blamed for earning less than men because they didn't negotiate. Government policies mandating companies to report the types of actions they are taking to address the wage gap, as well as explaining why they may not have policies in place, force companies to address the issue. They can also provide best practices for other organizations to implement. Furthermore, consequences for non-compliance should be robust and enforced in order to bring about actual change. There are companies that are actively implementing some of these solutions, and I'd like to share one example. Gap Inc. was the first Fortune 500 company in the United States to publicly disclose and validate that it pays women and men equally. The company's pay equality is a result of its long-standing commitment to inclusion. It emphasizes Gap Inc.'s intentional efforts to promote equality through its talent management processes with remarkable results. In addition to reaching pay equality, between 2007 and 2015, women's representation at the vice president level increased globally from 44% to 49.7%. At the most senior leadership level, meaning those reporting to the CEO, women's representation has gone from 33% to 77%. And women of color comprise 4 out of the 10 women. Notably, between 2010 and 2015, women's representation on Gap Inc.'s board of directors increased from 10% to 36%. These policies are one that organizations can and should enact, and the government should encourage and adopt. It's also critical to gender equality to monitor and track progress toward goals and embed checks and balances within recruitment, retention, and advancement policies. Countries with a more holistic approach toward gender equality, including guaranteed non-gendered family leave, access to affordable childcare, and legislated efforts to increase gender diversity in senior leadership, can be more successful in building inclusive workplaces that benefit women, men, and society. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fong. And we now have, by video conference, Professor Bilson, who has testified before the committee before. We've now had the benefit of a number of other witnesses who have come since. Professor Bilson, did you wish to testify again, or was there anything that you wanted to add to your previous testimony?
I don't really want to detain you long with a presentation, since I did have a chance to talk to you some weeks ago, but there are just a couple of things that I wanted to point out, and one has to do with the complexity of determining pay equity. One of the things I think that has bogged down systems which have been aimed at achieving pay equity, like joint job evaluation, I think has been the complexity of, because the comparison is between components of jobs, not whole jobs. generally speaking, and that's a very complex process, and there are a number of models on the market, as it were. And one of the things I think that led to all that protracted litigation under the Canadian Human Rights Act was that numerous experts testified for very long periods of time about different models. So I think if there's something useful that you could accomplish if you decide to go ahead with some sort of pay equity legislation, is to provide some guidance on the not necessarily choose one particular model, but provide guidance on what kind of model might be advantageous. And that really is a research project. I mean, there are lots of people with expertise in those areas who I think could provide assistance in determining what the limits should be on the possible models for implementing pay equity. Compared to, say, employment equity, where you are just deciding what proportion of the workforce, how the workforce should proportionately reflect society, or equal pay legislation, which really does compare the same job and decide whether people are achieving the same pay rate. I think pay equity is always going to be a more complicated proposition, and you have to be prepared for that. But other than that, I really would just welcome your questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And so we have now from the Equal Pay Coalition, Janet Borowy, and you have 7 minutes.
Madam Chair, thank you very much. The Equal Pay Coalition, by way of background, is an organization of over 30 women's groups, trade unions, community groups, and business organizations first formed in 1976. The objective is to secure action through laws, collective bargaining, policies, and programs to eradicate the gender pay gap. And of course, eradicate those factors creating and reproducing gender pay discrimination. So some 40 years later, the coalition continues to pursue its vision that approximately 30% gender pay gap, which exists in Canada's labor market today, and that's the statistic based on earnings. Our objective is to see that this disappears to 0%. Frankly, the gender pay gap is a urgent human rights crisis. The impact on our mothers and their pensions, on our daughters and their impact on their earnings over their lifetime, and our granddaughters who are about to enter into the labor market face a significant human rights crisis. Frankly, for our families, our communities, and Canadian society at large, the losses brought by the gender pay gap are staggering. The Equal Pay Coalition very much supports the committee's work in a forward-looking and progressive approach to securing pay equity in the federal jurisdictions. We have provided you with detailed submissions. We won't repeat those, obviously, and we encourage you to review those when they become available to you. There are 3 points we wanted to make this evening. But to start our comments, we want to say that it's widely recognized that the gender pay gap arises from systemic discrimination against women. What has been lacking is a comprehensive government action plan, which would include proactive legislation and policies and programs to explicitly and directly close the pay gap. Pay equity is, as you've heard from many deputants, an internationally recognized fundamental human right legal standard, which guarantees men and women receive equal pay for work of equal value. And this is because of 3 reasons. Women are segregated from men into different work in different workplaces. Second, the gender segregation of the labor market is accompanied by wage inequality. Female domination of a job and low pay are directly linked. And third, despite the attempts to explain away this gap by looking at the personal characteristics of women, at their hours of work and their nature of work, what fundamentally is taking place is an undervaluation of women's work, their skills, their effort, their responsibilities, and their working conditions. It's pay equity as a proactive legislation that steps in to help cure that undervaluation. comprehensive action plan to accomplish a goal of 0% gender pay equity gap within 10 years. So in order to do that, we argue there are 3 steps that need to be taken. First and foremost, the starting point for the foundation of a comprehensive action plan is to immediately act upon the 2004 Pay Equity Task Force recommendations and introduce proactive pay equity legislation. That legislation needs to include a comprehensive way to cover as many federally regulated employers and contractors, and to cover as many types of employment relationships as possible. The legislation needs to apply to female-dominated workplaces and enable proxy comparison methods. It needs to include mechanisms for maintaining pay equity of all of the plans that would have been negotiated to achieve. It does include a special oversight agency to administer, to interpret new plans, and to receive copies of pay equity plans to ensure the transparency that Ms. Fung just testified to. And the task force itself recommended innovative processes to develop access to pay equity complaints on considering multiple grounds of discrimination because of the deeper types of structural inequity that exists for equality-seeking groups. We support all of that. Second, and our second major point, frankly, is that this committee should recommend the repeal of that Orwellian titled Public Sector Equal Compensation Act and repeal this act immediately and quickly. Now, it was enacted but not proclaimed by the prior Conservative government. From the Coalition's vantage point, this legislation is regressive. It does not guarantee a fundamental right to equal pay of work of equal value. It introduced market forces into the calculation of the value of work, which are the same forces that created and reproduce the gender pay gap to begin with. Discrimination embedded in market mechanisms helps explain the persistent gender wage gap. Our third argument is that in order to effectively reduce the gender pay gap, the government does need to introduce and develop a comprehensive action plan. That requires an uprooting, if you will, of systemic discrimination through a fully multi-dimension action plan. Included in that, you will see in our report, in our brief to you, is a national child care program, an improvement on federal minimum wage, a improvement in access to a robust form of collective bargaining for all forms of women in various forms of employment relationships. And in order to do this, it requires the government actually applying a robust gender-based analysis to all forms of work and all forms of programs and policies that exist at the federal level. We appreciate that getting from nearly 30% to 0% will take a tremendous effort, but it's time to put women in all their diversity at the head of the line in terms of economic and social priorities. Otherwise, Canada leaves women languishing in lower paid, inferior jobs without jobs because of their care responsibilities and the barriers they face to gaining decent work. We look forward to bringing an end to systemic pay discrimination with you in collaboration with decision makers, policy makers, community organizations, businesses, and trade unions and women's groups. For now is the time that the federal government can take bold and innovative action to close the gender gap. Thank you very much, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of the witnesses. And we will start our questions with Mr. Sheehan for 7 minutes.
Well, thank you very much to all our presenters. That was very good information. My first question that I'm going to ask Beth. I didn't have an opportunity to ask that question because of our time was cut short. We had to go and do some votes. But since that time, we've had several witnesses, and they've pointed to Quebec as having the pay equity model that is closest to the recommendations made in the 2004 report of the Pay Equity Task Force. However, Ontario's had a pay equity law in place longer, I think since 1987. I guess the question to you would be then is, what is the difference between the Ontario and Quebec pay equity regimes? Because they do seem to be similar. So, Beth, if you would like to comment on that.
I mean, they are fairly similar. Certainly the framework, I think, is very similar, and that's not surprising because I think the Quebec legislation really borrowed heavily from the Ontario legislation when it was passed. I think there are some differences in the Quebec legislation that are worth drawing attention to. One, I think, is that in Quebec they have dealt, I think, quite imaginatively with the problem that is caused by trying to compare jobs in small enterprises and enterprises under a certain size where, as you might imagine, it's very difficult to draw very sensible conclusions when you have very few jobs in an enterprise. So they have made provision for sectoral dealing with in the tourist industry, for example, the hospitality industry, where there are lots of small employers. They have made provision for developing a single pay equity plan to cover a number of employers, so that they can sort of smooth out those anomalies and actually make some accurate comparisons and start getting an accurate picture of how those employees are dealt with. So there are, I think, some differences in the Quebec legislation, but they certainly have a lot of similarities.
And so, in your view, which system is more effective and why? Would you be able to comment on that?
Well, I think, and I have to say, I haven't really sort of monitored either Ontario or Quebec recently, so I can't, since our report was done, I haven't really paid close attention to how those two systems are operating. But I think the difference in Quebec was, I think that is something worth looking at because, there is still a lot of employment in Canada, which is in small organizations, small employers. And whatever mechanisms can be adopted to make some meaningful comparisons between male workers and female workers in those sectors, I think is worth examining.
Thank you very much. And my next question is for Serena. Your board of directors and your supporting members represent a large number of major global companies. What do your member companies do to achieve gender pay equity? That's my first question.
Well, I think in terms of the example that I gave with Gap Inc., it's the approach that we take and that we counsel them on is about solving all of the gaps that you have. Because once you do that, when you build an inclusive environment, you are going to end up closing your gap, your wage gap. You're going to, by having more women in leadership, by evaluating your talent management systems, by looking at the way that you're promoting and hiring, that it then just cascades and will bring about pay equity. So we talk to them about really, I think one of the people who testified prior to me talked about looking at the way that you have the talent development systems, and that we talk about diverse slates. We counsel them a lot about the business case and why they should do this, and so that's the approach that we take with them, because I think that if you try to piece it out too much, you're not really going to get to the systemic and unconscious and subconscious biases that are built into the systems.
Thank you. And I have a question for Janet. Your document is called "The 12 Steps to Closing the Gap," and it was directed at the Ontario, the government of Ontario, which of any of the key points in your documents are relevant for the federal government as well?
Thank you. The brief that we provided is actually updated the 12 steps and directed those at the federal government as well. So, for example, we've reviewed and based some of our recommendations, for instance, with respect to the improvement to the labor relations regime federally, based on Professor Arthur's report and improvements to the Canada Labour Code, which called, for instance, for an increase to the minimum wage. From the Coalition's vantage point as well, we are generally calling for mainstreaming equity compliance and gender-based analysis into government laws and policies. You know, so often policies are looked at, or government programs are looked at as just simply neutral, when in fact they actually do have a gender impact. Those are recommendations that make sense both federally and provincially. So I think you'll find that in the brief we've provided, it we've updated this to ensure that it addresses federally regulated sectors.
Unfortunately, that's it for the time. We have now Mr. Albus for 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. Appreciate this, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here. I'd like to go over to Ms. Fong first. Ms. Fong, I actually want to say that your submission here today has been excellent because it touches a lot, not just on some of the issues that we're here, but I think we've really focused too heavily on just Canada. Now, if we were focusing on Europe and other countries and whatnot, I probably would then have the criticism saying we haven't focused on Canada enough. So, but I do appreciate you've taken a much larger world view. Now, I'm intrigued here when you talk about pay transparency, particularly what the UK experience has been. Do you know much about what the government is doing in that case, or do you just give it a sight as something that possibly could be looked at by the committee?
Both to a certain extent, because the UK government hasn't actually, they either just passed their regulations or they're about to. So it hasn't actually gotten into effect yet. It just was announced by the Cameron government a few months ago, and then they're going to build on it. But it's
so just so that the committee, because I hate having conversations where I know nothing about it, is 250 employees and up.
Right.
Have to comply, and what they do is they average out men to women, what the average employee makes, and if there's a large differential, I guess, then they can take a look at that. Have I described that accurately?
Yes, that basically for the large companies that have 200, or companies with 250 employees or more, have to report out on what their salaries are. But I don't think there's any kind of penalties per se, in the sense that, you know, they're going to be fined or anything like that. But if they do, it's a way for them to see if there is a gap within their own organization. But it's also the way that they're doing it, because it's not, you know, they don't have to say this is what, you know, X employee is making, this is what Y employee is making. But it does, to your point, it does give the government and the public and the companies themselves the opportunity to look at, you know, what's going on. And
you see, I think in the earlier panel, I believe you said that you were here for, we had the Canadian Bankers Association, and one of the suggestions that I made was perhaps they could, you know, one of the banks could share some proprietary information on their policies, their roadmap on how they're going to address that. But, you know, from thinking about it further, you know, that's highly competitive data, and I don't think anyone would want to give that out just because it's a lot of investment goes into these. But to take an averaging of employees and what they make, and then putting it out there transparently. If there is a distortion due to some, you know, and I appreciate your I think the third paragraph, there's some positive news about the gender wage gap. These days, unequal wages usually don't happen intentionally. I think that's a really key point. And so what I like about the pay transparency regime is that for an individual business, under the federal regulations, they might just say, listen, we have something out of whack. Then you go on the next page, organizations should conduct equal pay audits. So would you say that the two almost go hand in hand, where if there was a number put out publicly, large company, a bank or whatnot, then they almost the onus on them would then be to kind of say, why is this happening? And then for them to look to see if there's internal remedies, because as you said in your on the first page, unequal wages usually don't happen intentionally. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that because you're absolutely right that I think there's the reluctance around reporting out that information. It's very private, it's what you're making, and no one wants to share that. It makes people very uncomfortable. But if you report out in terms of averages and bands, then yes, companies can benchmark themselves against what the other average is, and that's what we also recommend. They don't have to. I think earlier you mentioned that what gets measured gets done, and I think that by having these kinds of transparency laws and having those requirements to put out even averages, then it helps.
See, I think we're struggling a little bit here because both the public sector and the private sector are different beasts, so to speak. And I think we're trying to find tools of, say, how do we bring up awareness particularly in the private sector, because it's a large, as I said, 874,000 Canadians are employed in that sector. So would you say that pay transparency may be an option perhaps to engage the private sector for those? And again, I don't want to put a number out there, but perhaps maybe this committee might want to spend more time on that.
I think so. It's a good... Pay transparency is something that we've shown has been very effective in terms of closing the gaps, even within organizations. As I mentioned, Gap Inc., before they, of course, came out and publicly said this is what we did, they, of course, they ran a pay equity study, and they continued to do that as part of their whole program in order to figure in terms of building an inclusive environment. And the other thing that I think is really interesting about what they do is that not only do they continually to do the audits, but they also have money set aside, reserved, just in case that they find a gap, and so that they can correct for it. So I do think that transparency is very, very helpful. And you don't have to get that specific, but you can do it in terms of bands, in terms of ranges, where your employees are falling.
So again, the regulations could be put in place in such a way where they're very broad, but then individual companies, particularly the ones, for example, Gap, that make it a priority, or ones that find that there's something out of, they could form together these equal pay audits and do some of the things you're saying about to course correct. Is that right? Okay. Oh, no, I sincerely appreciate that. Now, the no negotiating policy, I'm just going to touch on that. That was done as an executive order. So basically, it's to the public service in the United States. Can you just briefly, because I don't know how much time I have left.
25 seconds.
Okay. Perhaps if you could just briefly just touch on that, and perhaps if there's any Canadian context that you might say how it might be adapted or at least examined. Again, I think that's the important part.
Don't have negotiations. Just say this is what the salary is.
Okay. And there will be a chance to follow up from that side. We will now go to Ms. Benson for 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thanks everyone for the presentations. And it's starting to sort of gel around some pieces that we've certainly heard from different witnesses about some of the things that are kind of gelling around what we could do as a committee to finally move this piece forward. And Beth, one thing you said that was quite helpful for me, and we've had various witnesses talk a bit differently about that, and that is sort of about the complexity around pay equity in comparison to some of the other things that we've been able to maybe address more easily around, outright wage discrimination and employment equity. And because of that complexity, is that one of the reasons why the need to have sort of a standalone organization that has some expertise? Because from what I hear you saying is that, part of the reason that some of those complaint-based pay equity cases took so long, 20 years, one of them, was because of that piece, sort of doing it piecemeal every time you got together to do one. Everyone was doing it again for that particular complaint. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yes, I think that's right. I think that one of the reasons for setting up administrative bodies, administrative tribunals to work under statutory mandates has to do with their specialized expertise. And the pay equity litigation that took place under the Canadian Human Rights Act followed the normal process under that act, which was through the Canadian Human Rights Commission and the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. But they had a very wide mandate covering all kinds of discrimination. And you would have a panel of the Human Rights Tribunal that would sit on one of those cases and then never sit on another one. So there was no ability to kind of build expertise or to have people become comfortable with what are really quite complex ideas, and the implementation is quite complicated. As I said last time, it's a very simple proposition, but putting it into effect does have some complexity. So the idea of having a specialized tribunal, I think, is what underlay our recommendations.
Thank you. And Ms. Fong, you talked about Gap Inc. being the first Fortune 500 company in the United States to publicly disclose and validate that it pays women and men equally. Are they the only one?
No, since then, other companies have come forth and announced that they've run pay equity studies. Salesforce was one that announced that they did an audit, and they found actually that they did have a gap, and I think they ended up saying that they spent $2 to $3 million to close the gap within their company. So others are doing it.
And do you think the leadership of their peer group that seems to be a bit of what you're saying, is that part of the role of your organization is to help leaders come forward and to set some kind of bar there that others want to reach?
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
Good. And Janet, I think the points that you brought up are important to sort of, and I think actually Ms. Fong, Serena did as well, and that is that, it's complex. Not that if you're just sort of tackling one piece, you're only going to see the pay gap narrowed for that particular reason. And so I think, Ms. Barway, you were talking about sort of the systemic piece that we need to get at, and that's the piece that's critical. Because it's easy, as some people have mentioned, to sort of say you have the same job as someone else and you're not being paid the same. That's wage discrimination. But to get at actually systemic inequities, we need to have mandates and government leadership to actually get at those pieces. It's not going to just happen on its own by the market, because that's one of the reasons we are where we are.
Yeah, so I think, yes, it does. And so there are two pieces and two arguments that we make. Number one is that you absolutely do need proactive legislation with clear timelines. Ontario, Quebec have timelines for the creation of the plants, for example. There are models out there that demonstrate that it doesn't have to be a 20-year laborious process where you're rebuilding the wheel every time you appear in front of a tribunal. Certainly the recommendations in the 2004 task force, which I frankly have to say is one of the most complete analysis of pay equity done internationally. It's a phenomenal piece of work, and I hope that the committee feels that it doesn't have to turn around and replicate it because it is so important. So that is one aspect, is a proactive law. That's a key element, legislative element. And I do want to say that it was recommended in 2004, and it's echoed by Ms. Fong, the importance of transparency. The task force called for the posting of pay equity plans, the registration of those plans with the specialized agency. That's a key part of transparency, as well as the UK and the US recent legislation that's calling for the posting of those plans, the posting of the wage information within each private sector employer is equally important. So that's one aspect. But we do know, I must say, at the Coalition, after 40 years of work, that frankly, a single piece of legislation won't close the gap. In Ontario, in 1985, the Green Paper, which analyzed pay equity, recognized there was a 38% wage gap with respect to earnings. Post the introduction of Ontario's Pay Equity Act, we're now roughly at 29 or 30% in the province. So we've seen an 8% reduction. That's important. Okay. But we know that there needs to be a comprehensive plan with elements including a national child care program, training, gender-based analysis in all aspects of the government.
Thank you, Ms. Barroy. That is time. So now we will go to Mr. DeCourcy for 7 minutes.
Thank you very much again, Madam Chair, and thank you everyone for being here this evening. Ms. Bilson, it's nice to have the opportunity to ask you a few questions, as I didn't have that chance several weeks ago. Since you came and spoke about your recommendations from the 2004 report and the process that was undertaken to deliver that, we've had a range of testimony from witnesses, some of who I would characterize as proponents of that framework listed out in your recommendations, who have talked about maybe some of the areas, not in specifics, where it wasn't quite palatable for government to move forward with implementation. And they've talked about ways that the implementation of a proactive pay equity system could be done in stages, and as well could have some flexibility for different size organizations, different sectors. I wonder if you have any reflection on that. Where are some areas, if we were to ground, a system broadly in your recommendations, where are some areas that might have some flexibility or that could be implemented in a staged approach?
Well, I think that our recommendations actually have quite a lot of capacity for flexibility, partly because I think one of the characteristics of the system we were proposing involved a lot of participation by employees and employers together to work out the plan that they wanted to put in place. And I think that provision, I mean, obviously there'd need to be a little more meat on it than that, but I think that kind of provision, I think, can provide for a lot of flexibility. That is, it can reflect small workplaces or large workplaces, public sector, private sector, a wide range of jobs, or a fairly homogeneous workplace. I think all of those things are possible under that kind of legislation, and there is some built-in flexibility there. I'm not sure what your question is in terms of the implementation and the timing. I mean, obviously, I think if you're going to establish timelines, which certainly the Ontario and Quebec legislation did, they have to be realistic. I mean, you have to understand that it's going to take people some time to work through the job comparisons and agree on the plan that they're going to put forward. On the other hand, I mean, time limits can be used in a way that is a way of kind of delaying the implementation, and certainly I think the task force didn't favor that. I mean, I think we favored having realistic timelines, but having some kind of goals in terms of time for implementing the system.
I guess what stuck with me from some of the testimony is yes, there are good things here. Can we implement them in bite-sized chunks, so they can be digested, and then government can move forward with working on the next pieces. So I certainly appreciate your reflection on that issue. Something else we've heard of is the need, and maybe I'll ask everyone here for comment, for ongoing maintenance of pay equity once it's established. In your report, Ms. Bilson, and perhaps Ms. Borowy and Ms. Fong, could you talk about if there are, or what would be some of the best ways to ensure maintenance of pay equity once legislation is in place, or a system is in place and it's being achieved?
I think the most obvious one is the reporting requirements. That is that the pay equity plan needs to be reported, and that was one of our recommendations. And there need to be, I think, periodic reports from an employer on the picture under the plan as they've implemented it, and then some kind of monitoring of the results of that to see whether the gap is narrowing or whether it's for some reason staying stagnant or even widening again.
You have to just, when we talk about maintenance, about pay equity, meaning you have to continue to run your audits. Because, to go back to something that Ms. Borowy also talked about, the gap is a reflection of a bigger issue in terms of gaps. So, for example, if you have a company that says, okay, we did a pay audit and we actually don't have a gap. Yet, if you look at their leadership, the women in leadership is very small. The way that they can say that they close their gap is by saying, if you only have 10 employees in a department and one of them is a woman, then you can say, oh, well, we're paying the woman equally to the rest of the men because there's only one of them. So I think you have to continue to see what other biases are happening. You also have to cut the data in different ways. You also have to look at what's happening, which is why you just have to continue to report, and that it's not just, once you reach pay equity, so to speak, within a company or within a business that you're done. You have to continue to look at it on the macro level and just cut the data differently, and also look at what's happening in terms of representation of women and men in other areas.
And maybe Ms. Borowy, I'll ask you to comment. Given I listened to you mention, I think, a proactive system being part of a more complex system around pay equity. So perhaps that speaks to some other mechanism whereby maintenance is ongoing.
Well, I think in terms of maintenance, I turn to the Ontario Act. I've just opened it up here, where it says every employer shall establish and maintain compensation practices that provide for pay equity. That is a proactive obligation on employers, of which should be monitored or audited on a regular basis. I think you'd find in Ontario, in most unionized workplaces, that people are looking at their pay equity plans on a regular basis every 2 years. The Act also provides for changed circumstances. So if there's structuring, for example, in a workplace, the parties then go back and assess whether they should amend or frankly, negotiate a brand new plan based on the broader issues that Ms. Fong was talking about.
Thank you very much, Ms. Borowy. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that's already 30 seconds over. So we will have to go to the next question. It's Ms. Stubbs, and you'll have 5 minutes and 30 seconds.
Okay. Hopefully I will be quick. I would like some more information on international context, if you can provide it, just given the international scope of your organization and the experiences of your companies in various countries. I wonder if you could share more on your perspective about those countries that have been successful at advancing gender pay equity, and if you have any views on what the reasons are for those successes, covering, if you can, the whole gamut of public policy decisions or legislative measures, and also non-legislative tools that may be happening in countries that are the most successful. And then secondarily, if you could comment on maybe what you perceive to be the barriers or the gaps or whatever, the downward pressures on countries who aren't as successful on advancing in gender pay equity.
So I would say that I think that, and I know that I had read some and listened to some of the previous testimony that, that they mentioned some countries internationally, such as Sweden and Norway. And one of the things that you find there, and it's what others have said before, is that their approach to the issue of pay equity has been wide-ranging, not only in terms of the legislative actions that they've taken, such as, the minimum wage, access to affordable daycare, non-gendered parental leave, those kinds of things, even looking at the issue of the representation of women on boards and leadership. And all of that has helped. And then you look at their partnership, as I mentioned, with the private sector, that when you have all of this working together, with the kinds of legislation that is being passed, as well as, and that puts pressure, I think, on the private sector to really step up and want to be good, and close their gaps and show and be examples. And so I think that internationally, that's where why you're having those kinds of situations where you have a good partnership going on, and you also have the legislative action as well as the actions that the businesses are taking upon themselves. I think in countries where you have where the gaps are bigger, you have a lot of cultural issues there. If you look at Japan, for example, the Abe administration is doing a lot of work because they are trying to they have recognized what the business case is for increasing women's representation. I mean, they have to do it because they're losing their labor force. But there is a lot of cultural issues that they have to break through in terms of the way that they see women's roles in society, and it takes a long time. Unfortunately, this is something that we need to act on immediately because it is so complex, and that it will take time to break down those societal barriers.
Thank you. Mrs. Bilson, I did have a question for you about one of the recommendations in the 2004 report, that companies under the Federal Contractors Program should be required to comply with proactive federal pay equity, or whatever kind of regime may be put forward federally. I just wondered, too, then, if in your view, that pay equity compliance should also be a condition for companies who may be recipients of federal subsidies or grants, and if they're not compliant.
Well, I guess I would say so. I think that we have to recognize that there's a lot of constitutional and legislative framework in Canada that suggests that discrimination is against the law, and I think that the federal government has one of the tools at its disposal is its ability to enter into either contracts with companies or to give subsidies or grants to companies. And I think that gives them some influence and an ability to insist that the people that they deal with not perpetuate discriminatory compensation practices. So I think that it logically follows from that recommendation that it would apply to companies that are receiving other kinds of financial benefits from dealing with the federal government.
Thank you. Did you have
30 seconds?
That's fine. Thank you.
Did any of the other witnesses want to respond to that?
Yeah, if anybody else does want to comment.
Did any of the other witnesses want to respond to that question in 20 seconds or less?
I just simply would point, it's Jan, point the committee to the 1984 Royal Commission on Employment Equity by Justice Abella, where she said that to imply that women somehow have a duty to be paid less until other financial priorities are accommodated was specious reasoning. And I think that one of the factors underlying the application of a proactive pay equity scheme and regime to federally regulated contractors, frankly, is answered by Justice Abella.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, it is 8:30. I don't know if it's the will of the committee. We do have this room until 9:30, as we had discussed previously. We could finish the full round of questioning in 18 minutes, if that's the wish of the committee, or we could adjourn now. Is there consensus to adjourn? Okay, so I will. It is quite late, and we've been now through 3 hours straight without a break of panels. There's been some tremendous information. Thank you very, very much to the panelists. I do want to update the committee on the status of the witnesses that we have been inviting. There are a number of witnesses who have declined our invitation, and I just wanted to go through them very quickly for your information. The Canadian Bar Association, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, Beatrix Dart, Professor, University of Toronto, and the Women's Legal Education and Action Fund have declined. We also received today another request to appear, which we have invited them to submit a written brief, given that it's so late in the date, and that was from the Canadian Association of Counsel to Employers. So we do have a special meeting tomorrow at a different time, so that's Tuesday tomorrow, 5:30 to 7:30, with the three ministers. The location, I believe, is in the Centre Block, so it will be closer. And then, of course, we have another long meeting on Thursday night. So we'll see. Or sorry, Wednesday night. Wednesday night. So thank you very, very much, everybody, and we are adjourned.